I stood on my own front porch, bleeding through my post-surgery bandages, with my 3-day-old newborn in my arms. The smart lock buzzed red, denying me access. My husband had changed the passcode, abandoned us at the hospital, and flown to Cabo with his mother, so his brother-in-law's frat friends could crash in my custom-built house. I did not sit down and cry. I called a locksmith, packed his bags, and quietly sold the multi-million-dollar property right out from under them. They returned from the beach expecting a cooked meal, but they found a demolition crew instead. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic family that you are the foundation they should never have crossed. I am Kendra, 33 years old, and a corporate real estate portfolio manager in Atlanta. The July heat in Georgia is unforgiving on a good day, but standing on the stone steps of my own luxury property in Buckhead, just 72 hours after a grueling emergency C-section, the humidity felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. My infant son, Malik, fussed softly in his car seat carrier. Sweat stung my eyes as I reached out with a trembling hand to punch my code into the front door keypad. The familiar chime did not sound. Instead, a harsh red light flashed. Access denied. I blinked, assuming my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. I typed the numbers again, using our anniversary, the day we closed on the house, and the backup code. Red light, red light, red light. Panic, sharp and icy, sliced through the sweltering heat. I pulled out my phone and dialed my husband, Terrence. It went straight to voicemail. No ringing, just the automated prompt. Terrence was an insurance executive who never let his phone die. My heart pounded against my bruised ribs. I opened our messages, but there was nothing. I opened the family group chat, a thread I usually kept muted for my own sanity. The screen loaded a picture that made my blood run cold. There was Terrence, grinning widely. Next to him sat his mother, Brenda, her hair freshly blown out, and a massive margarita in her hand. Across the aisle sat his sister, Chloe, and her husband, Trent, a perpetually unemployed crypto bro who had somehow managed to fail his way into an endless stream of my husband's money. They were lounging in first-class airline seats. The caption read, "Cabo bound." Beneath the photo was a direct text from Brenda. It did not ask how her first and only grandson was doing. It did not ask if I had survived the surgery. It read, "Terrence changed the code, Kendra. Trent and Chloe's frat friends needed a free place to stay for the music festival, so they are using the house. Go stay with your cousin on the south side. Do not ruin our family bonding trip with your postpartum hormones." The sheer audacity of the message paralyzed me for exactly 10 seconds. I was bleeding. I was holding a newborn baby who needed to be fed and changed. And my husband, the man who had promised to protect us, had locked us out of the home I purchased and designed to cater to his sister's entitled husband. Terrence had a long, pathetic history of using our resources to buy Brenda's approval. Whenever Trent lost another $50,000 on a fake digital coin, Terrence was right there dipping into his bonuses to cover the mortgage for Chloe and Trent. Brenda demanded absolute loyalty, and Terrence paid her tax without question. But locking his own recovering wife and newborn son out in the 90-degree heat so a bunch of grown men could treat my velvet sofas like a tailgate party was a line I never thought he would cross. I looked down at Malik. His little face was red and his cries were growing louder. I did not collapse onto my suitcase. I did not sit on the porch and weep into my hands. The woman who spent years carefully acquiring and managing commercial high-rises for a living did not have the luxury of breaking down. I picked up my phone and bypassed my contacts list for family. I dialed Isaiah, a master locksmith I contracted exclusively for my corporate properties. Isaiah answered on the second ring. "I need you at my personal residence immediately," I told him, keeping my voice steady despite the searing pain in my abdomen. "It is an emergency drill, the deadbolt if you have to." He promised to be there in 20 minutes. As I retreated to my SUV to keep Malik in the air conditioning, I replayed the last 9 months in my head. Terence had complained endlessly about the cost of the nursery furniture. He had scrutinized every medical bill from my high-risk pregnancy, demanding I use my own accounts to cover the out-of-network specialists. Yet he somehow found the funds to charter a first-class vacation to Mexico for 4 adults. A vacation they clearly planned while I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. I gently rocked the car seat, whispering softly to my son, promising him that this would be the last time anyone in that family treated him as an inconvenience. Brenda had always viewed me as a threat. I was not the subservient, quiet daughter-in-law she wanted for her son. I made my own money, held my own titles, and refused to fund her lavish lifestyle. Her text message was not just an update, it was a power play. It was her way of showing me that she could snap her fingers and my husband would abandon his newborn child just to appease her. She wanted to remind me of my place, but she had made one massive fatal miscalculation. She assumed the house belonged to Terence. Isaiah pulled his work van into the driveway precisely 20 minutes later. He took one look at my pale, sweating face and the baby carrier in the back seat and did not ask a single question. He grabbed his heavy-duty drill and marched up to the front door. The loud grinding noise of metal tearing into metal echoed through the quiet suburban street. It was the sound of my marriage completely disintegrating, and honestly, it was music to my ears. I pulled up my banking application on my phone to prepare his payment. The drill chewed through the smart lock. I navigated to the joint savings account Terence and I shared. This was the account where I had carefully deposited $40,000 over the last year. It was money strictly earmarked for Malik's future college fund and to cover my unpaid maternity leave so I could stay home for 3 months without stressing over the mortgage. The app refreshed. The balance loaded on the screen, $12.43. I stared at the numbers, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. $12. I refreshed the application, hoping it was a network error. The numbers remained unchanged. A deeper dive into the transaction history revealed the devastating truth. 3 days ago, while I was heavily medicated and recovering from a major abdominal surgery, Terence had initiated 2 massive wire transfers. One transfer for $15,000 went directly to an offshore resort holding company. The other, for $25,000, was routed to a digital currency exchange account registered to Trent. Terence did not just abandon me at the hospital, he stole my safety net to fund Brenda's luxury getaway and Trent's delusional lifestyle. The betrayal hit me with such force that I physically stumbled, leaning against the side of my vehicle for support. My husband had drained the money I bled and starved for, the money meant to feed and protect his own flesh and blood, all because he could not say no to his mother and her favorite son-in-law. I closed my eyes and let the reality wash over me. For years, Terence had constantly policed my spending. He would interrogate me over the cost of a business suit or a professional networking dinner, claiming we needed to be financially responsible for the baby. He lectured me about budgeting, while simultaneously writing quiet checks to cover Chloe's luxury car payments, because Trent was between opportunities. Trent was a classic grifter, a man who used a lot of business buzzwords but never actually held a job. He convinced Chloe that he was a misunderstood genius, and by extension convinced Brenda that he just needed the right capital to become a billionaire. Terence, wanting nothing more than to be the family savior, always provided that capital. And now he had used my maternity fund to do it. The heavy oak door finally clicked open. Isaiah stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You are all set, Miss Kendra," he said quietly. I transferred his payment from my private business account, the one Terence had no access to. I thanked Isaiah and carried Malik up the steps. But instead of silence, heavy bass music thumped from the living room. The house was already occupied. I pushed the door open completely, stepping into the foyer. The smell of cheap beer and stale smoke hit me instantly. I walked into my living room to find 4 men I had never seen before sprawling across my pristine, custom-designed furniture. They had moved my glass coffee table aside to make room for a pile of pizza boxes and empty bottles. The velvet sofa I had waited 6 months to have imported from Italy was currently serving as a footrest for a man wearing muddy boots. "Hey," one of the men slurred, looking up at me with half-open eyes. You must be the cleaning lady. You are just in time to bring us some fresh towels. Trent said this place was fully stocked, but we ran out of clean ones this morning. The absolute arrogance of it was staggering. Trent, a man who did not own a single piece of property, had given his frat brothers full reign over my home. I did not yell. I did not scream or demand they leave. Engaging with intoxicated, entitled men while holding a newborn was not a risk I was willing to take. I simply turned around, walked back out the front door, and secured Malik safely in my locked air-conditioned SUV. Then I pulled out my phone and called the local precinct. "Hello," I said, my voice dropping into the authoritative tone I used to negotiate multi-million-dollar commercial leases. "I need several officers dispatched to my property immediately. I have 4 unknown adult males trespassing in my home, and I am a mother with a newborn child. Because my name and my limited liability company were the only entities on the deed, I had absolute legal authority to remove them." The police arrived within 10 minutes, pulling up with their lights flashing. I met the officers in the driveway, presenting my identification and the digital deed to the property, right there on my phone. They marched into the house and the music was abruptly shut off. Through the open door, I heard the men attempting to argue. Trent gave us permission. One of them yelled loudly. He said it was his brother-in-law's house and we could crash here for the festival. The officers were unimpressed. They escorted the men out in handcuffs when 2 of them refused to leave peacefully and began shouting profanities. I stood on the sidewalk rocking Malik's car seat and watched them being shoved into the back of a squad car. As the police cruisers pulled away, my phone lit up. The caller ID displayed an international number. It was Terrence calling from Mexico. I accepted the call. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Terrence screamed through the phone, the sound of ocean waves and resort music in the background. Trent's friends just called him from the back of a squad car. "They are being processed downtown. Trent promised them the house for the weekend." "You are embarrassing me in front of my family. Go back to the hospital if you are going to act this unhinged." I waited exactly 3 seconds, letting his manic energy echo through the receiver. "Where is the $40,000, Terrence?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He scoffed, a sound of pure condescension. "It is an investment, Kendra. Trent pitched me a guaranteed crypto opportunity that will double our money by the end of the month. I use the rest to upgrade Mom to the penthouse suite because she deserves to be pampered. You are overreacting as usual. Tell the police to drop the charges and let them back in the house right now." He spoke to me as if I were a disobedient child, rather than the primary breadwinner and legal owner of the property he was currently treating like a timeshare. He truly believed he held all the cards. I did not scream back. I did not cry about the betrayal. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed end call right in the middle of his next sentence. I blocked his number, blocked Brenda, blocked Chloe, and blocked Trent. I walked into my quiet, empty house, locked the new deadbolt, and set Malik down in his nursery. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a sleek black business card from a luxury developer. For 6 months, Apex developers had been harassing me with massive all-cash offers for my double-lot property. They wanted to tear down the single-family homes on my street to build luxury townhomes. Terrence had always refused to consider it, claiming he loved the prestige of the neighborhood. But Terrence did not own the house. 3 years ago, Trent, the resident grifter, had convinced Terrence that my real estate portfolio was a sinking ship. Trent claimed my limited liability company was a tax trap that would eventually ruin Terrence financially. Terrence, wanting to protect his own meager assets and bonus checks, had happily signed a post-nuptial agreement drafted by Trent's cheap internet lawyer, waiving all rights to my property and my businesses. Their sheer arrogance and profound ignorance of property law had handed me the ultimate shield. I dialed the acquisitions director at Apex. He answered immediately, recognizing my number. "You want the property," I said, not bothering with small talk. 10-day close. All cash. As is. No contingencies. The director practically choked on his coffee. "We can wire the earnest money in an hour," he replied eagerly. But the demolition permits are already approved for that sector. We need the property completely vacant and ready for teardown in exactly 9 days. 9 days. One day before Terrence and his toxic family were scheduled to return from their luxury Cabo vacation. Perfect, I said. Send the contracts. I hung up the phone and looked around the beautiful living room I had spent years curating. It was just a house. My son and my peace of mind were my home. I pulled out my laptop and called my divorce attorney, Valerie, a woman known in Atlanta legal circles for being absolutely ruthless. Valerie, we are filing for divorce today, I said as soon as she answered. I need an emergency freeze on all my personal accounts, and I am initiating a child support order. I also need you to review the post-nuptial agreement Terrence signed 3 years ago. I am liquidating the marital residence. Valerie let out a low, appreciative whistle. I will have the paperwork drafted by the end of the hour. While we were speaking, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from Brenda, who had apparently borrowed someone else's phone to bypass my block. Since you are home doing nothing, Trent needs you to overnight his custom golf shoes to the resort. Put it on your card. Terrence is very disappointed in your behavior today. Do not make things worse for yourself. I stared at the message, a cold, lethal smile spreading across my face. I typed a quick reply. Sure thing. Taking care of his belongings right now. I put the phone down and immediately booked a premium moving crew for the next morning. It was time to clean house literally and figuratively. The Atlanta heat was not just hot, it was oppressive. It wrapped around me like a wet blanket, making every breath feel heavy. My C-section scar throbbed with a sharp, burning intensity, a constant reminder of the major abdominal surgery I had undergone less than 72 hours ago. I stood on the pristine porch of the home I had meticulously designed, shifting my weight carefully to avoid tearing my stitches. Malik stirred in his infant carrier, letting out a fragile, high-pitched wail. I gently rocked the carrier with my foot, murmuring soft assurances that I would get us inside soon. Isaiah pulled his white work van into my driveway exactly 12 minutes after I called him. I use him exclusively for my corporate properties because he asks 0 questions and works with surgical precision. He took one look at my pale, sweating face, the hospital bracelet still wrapped around my wrist, and the newborn baby at my feet. He gave a curt professional nod, grabbed his heavy-duty drill, and marched straight up the steps to my front door. The loud, aggressive grinding of metal chewing through the brass deadbolt echoed across the quiet, manicured suburban street. It was a harsh, ugly sound, but to me it was the sound of my marriage finally fracturing beyond repair. Terrence had pushed me before. He had tested my boundaries, tested my patience, and tested my sanity. But locking a bleeding woman and a 3-day-old infant out of their own home in the dead of summer to accommodate his brother-in-law's fraternity friends was a line I never thought he would possess the audacity to cross. I needed to pay Isaiah. I pulled my phone from my purse, shielding the screen from the glaring afternoon sun. I opened my banking application, relying on the facial recognition to log me in. I navigated directly to the joint savings account Terrence and I shared. This was the account where I had systematically deposited $40,000 over the last 14 months. That money was sacred. It was my unpaid maternity leave fund, ensuring I could stay home and bond with Malik for 3 months without stressing over the mortgage or utility bills. The remainder was the seed money for my son's college trust. The application refreshed. The loading circle spun for a second before the balance appeared in bold black numbers on the screen, $12.43. I stopped breathing. The oppressive heat suddenly turned ice cold against my skin. I blinked rapidly, convinced the glare from the sun was distorting the screen. I swiped down to refresh the page again. The numbers did not change. $12.43. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to brace my hand against the brick pillar of the porch. I clicked into the transaction history, my fingers trembling. The digital ledger laid out the exact anatomy of my husband's betrayal. Yesterday afternoon, while I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors with the epidural just barely wearing off, Terrence had initiated two massive wire transfers. One transfer for $15,000 went directly to a holding company associated with a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. The other transfer for $24,900 was routed to a digital currency exchange account registered to Trent. Terrence did not just abandon his wife and newborn son at the hospital. He completely disarmed us. He stole the safety net I had bled and starved to build so he could fund his mother's five-star getaway and his brother-in-law's pathetic lifestyle. A bitter, familiar realization washed over me. Terrence grew up desperate for his mother's validation. Brenda treated maternal love like a subscription service, and Terrence was always behind on his payments. Whenever Trent pitched a new ridiculous business venture, a fake digital coin, a revolutionary app that was just a cheap knockoff of a ride-sharing service, Terrence was right there pulling out his checkbook to fund it. He wanted to be the big man, the savior, the provider for his entire extended family. He wanted Brenda to look at him the way she looked at her golden child, Chloe. Meanwhile, the hypocrisy of his financial policing was staggering. If I bought a designer blazer for a corporate presentation or hired a premium landscaping service for the property, Terrence would demand a line-by-line breakdown of my credit card statement. He would lecture me about fiscal responsibility, about preparing for the baby, about not being flashy. He scrutinized every dollar I spent on our actual lives while quietly hemorrhaging tens of thousands of dollars to buy his mother's respect. And now he had stolen from his own 3-day-old son to maintain that facade. He drained my maternity fund to pay for first-class tickets and bottomless margaritas. The sheer malice of the act crystallized in my mind. He thought leaving me completely broke and locked out would force me into submission. He thought I would have to call him begging for access to my own money, apologizing for whatever perceived slight I had committed by asking him to stay at the hospital. He thought he held all the power. He forgot exactly who he married. I closed the joint account screen. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a luxury for women who had time to waste, and I had a war to win. I switched over to my private corporate portfolio account, the one legally shielded by my standalone limited liability company, the one Terrence had absolutely no access to and no knowledge of. I tapped the screen and sent Isaiah his emergency fee, adding a massive tip for his speed and discretion. The heavy grinding noise stopped. Isaiah wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and pulled his drill away from the mangled lock. He turned the handle, and the heavy custom oak door clicked open. "You are all set, Miss Kendra," he said, packing his gear into his bag. "I advise getting a whole new security system installed by tonight, but this will get you inside." I thanked him, grabbed my purse, and carefully hoisted Malik's car seat into my arms. Isaiah walked back to his van, and I stepped over the threshold of my home. I expected to be greeted by the cool rush of central air conditioning and the pristine quiet of my carefully curated foyer. I expected the familiar scent of the citrus candles I kept in the hallway. Instead, the hardwood floorboards were vibrating beneath my sandals. A heavy, rhythmic bass line thumped violently from the direction of my living room, rattling the expensive artwork hanging on the walls. The smell of cheap stale beer and cheap cologne hit me like a physical blow. The house was not empty. The invasion had already begun. I pushed the heavy front door open entirely, and the blast of suffocating air conditioning mixed with stale beer practically knocked me backward. I stepped into my own foyer and felt my blood turn to absolute ice. The bass from a portable Bluetooth speaker was vibrating the crystal chandelier I had imported from Murano. I walked past the entryway into the main living room, holding my sleeping son tightly against my chest, and took in the sheer destruction of my personal sanctuary. 4 grown men who looked like they were desperately clinging to their college glory days were sprawled across my custom cream-colored velvet sectional. They had pushed my Italian marble coffee table out of the way to make room for a makeshift beer pong setup using plastic cups and cheap liquor. Wet condensation rings were already sinking into the pristine stone surface. Muddy sneakers were propped up on the delicate upholstery of my accent chairs. Empty pizza boxes, grease seeping through the cardboard, were stacked on my antique console table. For a moment, I just stood there, taking in the absolute audacity of the scene. These were Trent's friends, men in their early 30s who still thought a weekend music festival justified turning a luxury home into a landfill. Trent had always surrounded himself with other entitled underachievers who believed the world owed them a favor, and my husband Terence had handed them the keys to my kingdom. One of the men, a sunburned guy wearing a backwards baseball cap and a stained tank top, finally noticed me standing by the archway. He blinked his bloodshot eyes, struggling to focus on the woman holding a newborn baby in the middle of his frat party. "Oh, hey," he slurred, raising a half-empty bottle in my direction. "You must be the cleaning lady Terrence hired. You are just in time. The master bathroom is out of fresh towels and someone spilled salsa in the guest room. Be a sweetheart and grab some extra toilet paper while you are at it." I did not scream. I did not throw the nearest heavy object at his head, though the temptation was incredibly strong. If I were the same naive woman who married Terrence 3 years ago, I might have started a screaming match demanding to know how they got in. But I was not that woman anymore. I was a corporate portfolio manager who dealt with hostile commercial tenants for a living. I handled million-dollar evictions before my morning coffee. Engaging with 4 intoxicated trespassers while holding a 3-day-old infant was a tactical error I was not about to make. I looked the sunburned man dead in the eyes and offered a smile so devoid of warmth it could have frozen the room. "I will get right on that," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Let me just go grab my supplies from the car." I turned on my heel and walked straight out the front door, closing it firmly behind me. I marched down the driveway, the oppressive Georgia humidity washing over me again, but I barely felt it. My mind was operating with surgical precision. I unlocked my SUV, started the engine, and turned the air conditioning on full blast. I gently secured Malik back into his car seat, making sure he was comfortable and safe behind the tinted windows and locked doors. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed the local police precinct. I did not dial emergency services because this was not a panic situation. This was a property dispute, and I held all the winning cards. "I need several officers dispatched to my property immediately." I told the dispatcher, my tone crisp and authoritative. "I have 4 unknown adult males trespassing in my home. I am a mother with a newborn child, and these individuals have occupied my residence without my consent. Because my personal limited liability company was the sole entity on the deed, I had absolute legal authority to remove them." When Terrence and I got married, Trent had convinced him that my real estate ventures were a massive liability. Trent, the resident financial failure, claimed my corporate structures were a tax trap that would eventually ruin Terrence. Wanting to protect his own bonus checks, Terrence had happily signed a post-nuptial agreement waiving all rights to my property and my businesses. His arrogance had just handed me the ultimate weapon. 3 patrol cars pulled up to the curb less than 10 minutes later, their lights flashing silently against the manicured lawns of my upscale neighborhood. I met the officers at the end of the driveway, presenting my identification and pulling up the digital deed to the property on my phone. I showed them the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry, proving that my company was the sole owner of the estate. Terrence's name did not exist on any piece of paper tied to this land. "I have not authorized anyone to be in my home," I explained to the lead officer, a stern-looking man who took one look at my fresh hospital bracelet and nodded in understanding. My husband mistakenly gave the access code to his brother-in-law, who then gave it to these strangers. "I want them trespassed and removed immediately." The officers did not hesitate. They marched up the steps and pushed into the house. The heavy bass music was abruptly silenced, replaced by the loud, confused shouting of intoxicated men. I stood by my vehicle, crossing my arms and watching through the open front door. "What is the problem, officer?" the sunburned guy demanded, his voice carrying out to the street. "We have permission to be here. Trent said his brother-in-law Terrence owns this place. We are guests." The lead officer's response was sharp and uncompromising. "Terrence does not own this property. The legal owner is standing in the driveway and she wants you out. Grab your things and exit the premises right now, or you will be arrested for criminal trespass." The realization that they were not dealing with a cleaning lady but the actual homeowner seemed to enrage them. They started arguing, puffing up their chests and demanding to call Trent. One of them aggressively shoved past an officer to grab a duffel bag, shouting profanities about how they had nowhere else to stay in Atlanta. That was their fatal mistake. You do not touch a police officer, and you certainly do not resist a lawful trespass order. The situation escalated in a matter of seconds. I watched with profound cold satisfaction as handcuffs were unclipped and readied. The sound of metal ratcheting shut echoed through my foyer. Two of the men who decided to physically resist being escorted out were pushed against my hallway wall, their rights being read to them loud and clear. They were marched out the front door in a single file line, looking completely humiliated, as my wealthy neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains to watch the spectacle. The sunburned man who had asked me for towels glared at me as an officer guided him toward the back of a squad car. I offered him that same freezing smile. I could not find the fresh towels. I called out smoothly. "Looks like you will have to drip dry in holding." The lead officer stayed behind to ensure the house was clear, making sure I felt safe re-entering my own property. I thanked him sincerely. He handed me a business card with the incident report number and advised me to change my locks, which I noted had already been handled by the drilled deadbolt hanging off the frame. As the final police cruiser pulled away down the tree-lined street carrying Trent's friends to a booking cell downtown, the profound silence of my neighborhood returned. I walked back into my house, stepping over a discarded beer can, and stood in the center of the ruined living room. The physical mess was disgusting, but the emotional clarity I felt in that moment was pristine. Terrence had tried to break me. He had tried to leave me stranded and desperate, forcing me to beg for access to my own life. Instead, he had just handed me the exact justification I needed to burn his world to the ground. I was just calculating how much the deep cleaning service would cost when the silence was shattered by a sharp buzzing sound. My phone lit up in the palm of my hand. The screen displayed an international caller ID. It was Terrence calling from his beachside cabana in Cabo San Lucas. And based on how quickly the phone was ringing, Trent's friends had already used their one phone call from the back of the squad car to deliver the bad news. Terrence was about to realize that the woman he left locked out on the pavement was the one holding the keys to his entire existence. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my heart rate, and swiped the green button to answer. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Terrence screamed, the sheer volume of his voice forcing me to pull the phone away from my ear. In the background, I could clearly hear the rhythmic strumming of a resort mariachi band, the gentle crash of ocean waves, and the clinking of ice in heavy glassware. He was standing by a luxury pool in another country, screaming at the mother of his 3-day-old child. Trent's fraternity brothers just called him from the back of a police cruiser, Kendra. "They are being processed downtown right now. What is wrong with you?" I stood completely still in my foyer. The heavy Georgia heat still clung to my skin, and my surgical incision burned with a fierce, sharp ache, but my mind was operating with the cold, calculating precision of a corporate audit. "You are embarrassing me in front of my family!" Terrence barked, his voice cracking with that specific type of panic he only ever got when his mother or his brother-in-law were upset with him. They just wanted a place to stay for the music festival. Trent promised them the house for the weekend. We are supposed to be having a peaceful family bonding trip, and instead I am out here dealing with your postpartum hormones. If you are going to act this unhinged, go back to the hospital. He actually used the word unhinged. He weaponized my medical recovery and my very justifiable outrage to paint me as an unstable, hysterical woman. It was a classic manipulation tactic. He wanted me defending my sanity instead of questioning his actions. I refused to play the game. I shifted the weight of the baby carrier in my arms, ensuring Malik was still sleeping peacefully, and took a slow, measured breath. "Where is the $40,000, Terrence?" I asked, my voice dropping into a dead flat professional register. There was a brief hesitation on the line. The bluster faded for a fraction of a second before his defensive arrogance kicked right back in. The sound of a lighter flicking told me he was lighting one of those expensive cigars he bought whenever he wanted to pretend he was a big shot around Trent. "You are obsessing over pennies when I am trying to build wealth for us?" Terrence scoffed. "It is an investment, Kendra. Trent brought me a guaranteed crypto opportunity. It is a new digital coin launch that is going to double our money by the end of the month. You are always telling me to be proactive about our finances instead of leaving everything to you. Well, I am being proactive. I stared at the ruined velvet sofa in my living room. $25,000 of my hard-earned savings. The money meant to keep our son fed and our lights on, while I took unpaid leave from my firm, had been handed over to a perpetually unemployed grifter who probably bought fake internet money from a guy in a nightclub bathroom. Trent had a long documented history of convincing Terrence to fund his delusions. There was the luxury sneaker reselling business that never launched. There was the boutique energy drink company that ended with a garage full of expired inventory. Terrence never learned because buying into Trent's scams was the only way Terrence could buy his mother's approval. And the other $15,000 I asked, keeping my tone completely devoid of emotion. I used the rest to upgrade Mom to the penthouse suite, Terrence said without a single ounce of hesitation or shame. She has been stressed lately, and she deserves to be pampered. You are sitting at home anyway, doing nothing. You do not need that cash just sitting in a savings account gathering dust. His delusion was absolute. He actually believed he was the chief executive of our marriage. He genuinely thought that my limited liability company, my money, and my house were his personal assets to distribute to a mother who despised me and a brother-in-law who refused to work. He thought stealing my safety net was perfectly justified because Brenda required a panoramic ocean view to cure her stress. In the background, I heard Brenda's sharp, shrill voice cutting through the resort ambiance. Tell that girl to stop ruining our vacation, Terrence. Trent is absolutely humiliated right now. His friends are threatening to sue him. You tell her to fix this right now. Terrence immediately echoed his mother, his tone growing even more demanding. Do you hear that, Kendra? You are ruining this trip. I want you to call the precinct right now and tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. Tell them to drop the charges and release Trent's friends. Then you need to drive down there, pick them up, bring them back to the house, and apologize for overreacting. You need to be a better host, and I want you to text Trent and apologize for embarrassing him. There was no anger left in my body. Anger requires passion, and my passion for this man had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but cold, hard logic. I looked at the situation the same way I looked at a failing commercial property in my investment portfolio. Terrence was a bad asset. He was a massive liability, draining my resources, disrespecting my boundaries, and actively endangering my child. You do not negotiate with a bad asset. You do not argue with a bad asset. You liquidate it. I did not scream at him. I did not hurl insults or call him a thief. I did not waste my breath explaining that my maternity leave was now entirely unfunded or that our newborn son needed diapers and formula. I did not demand that he come home and act like a father. I simply pulled the phone away from my face, pressed the red end call button right in the middle of his demand for an apology, and watched the screen go black. I opened my phone settings. I navigated to Terrence's contact profile and pressed block. I scrolled down to Brenda's number and pressed block. I found Chloe and pressed block. I found Trent and pressed block. A profound, heavy silence fell over my living room. The mariachi music, the ocean waves, and the toxic demands were completely shut out of my life. I stood alone in my foyer with my sleeping son. I walked past the ruined Italian marble coffee table and the puddle of cheap beer staining the hardwood floor. I moved straight to my leather work briefcase sitting by the entryway console. I unclasped the brass lock, reached into the interior pocket, and pulled out a sleek, matte black business card with embossed silver lettering. Apex Developers. For 6 straight months, their acquisitions director had been flooding my inbox and my voicemail with aggressive all-cash offers. They desperately wanted my double-lot property to complete their luxury townhome project. Terrence had always forbidden me from selling, claiming he loved the prestige of the suburban neighborhood and the custom landscaping he never actually paid to maintain. But Terrence had signed a post-nuptial agreement at Trent's, urging legally waiving all rights to my real estate holdings. Terrence no longer had a say in what happened to this land. I looked at the silver phone number printed on the black card. The developer wanted the property, I wanted Terrence and his family to return from their luxury vacation to find absolutely nothing left. I tapped the number into my phone and listened to it ring. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Terrence screamed through the phone, the sheer volume of his voice forcing me to pull the device away from my ear. The sound of a resort mariachi band and crashing ocean waves echoed loudly in the background. Trent's friends just called him from the back of a squad car. "They are being processed downtown right now. Trent promised them the house for the weekend. You are embarrassing me in front of my entire family. Go back to the hospital if you are going to act this unhinged." He spoke to me as if I were a disobedient child throwing a tantrum rather than the primary breadwinner and legal owner of the property he was currently treating like a timeshare. He used the word unhinged, weaponizing my medical recovery to gaslight me into submission. I waited exactly 3 seconds, letting his manic, aggressive energy ring hollow in my quiet foyer. "Where is the $40,000, Terrence?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm and devoid of any emotion. He scoffed a sound of pure condescension. "It is an investment, Kendra. Trent pitched me a guaranteed crypto opportunity. It is a digital coin launch that will double our money by the end of the month. I used the rest to upgrade Mom to the penthouse suite because she deserves to be pampered. You are overreacting as usual. Tell the police to drop the charges and let those boys back in the house right now." He actually believed he held all the cards. He believed he could steal my unpaid maternity leave fund, hand it to a grifter, and demand I host a frat party while recovering from major surgery. I did not scream back. I did not cry about the profound betrayal. I simply pulled the phone away from my face and pressed the red end call button right in the middle of his next arrogant sentence. I opened my settings, blocked his number, blocked, Brenda blocked Chloe, and blocked Trent. I walked into my living room, stepping over a crushed beer can, and opened my leather briefcase. I reached into the interior pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card from a luxury developer. The line rang exactly twice before a smooth, polished voice answered. It was Marcus, the Regional Acquisitions Director for Apex Developers. For the better part of 6 straight months, Marcus had been treating my voicemail inbox like his own personal diary. Apex was currently constructing a sprawling, ultra-luxury townhome community right behind my back property line. To finish their grand architectural vision and secure the highly coveted private road access, they desperately needed my double lot. I had politely declined his weekly calls for half a year. Terrence had always insisted we keep the house. He loved hosting his fraternity brothers on the expansive back patio and bragging about the property value he did not actually pay a single dime to maintain. But Terrence had forfeited his right to an opinion the exact moment he stole my child's money. "Marcus," I said, bypassing the standard corporate pleasantries and dropping straight into my boardroom register. "You have been practically begging for my property since January. I am finally ready to sell, but we are doing this strictly on my terms." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the frantic rustling of papers. "You have my full attention, Kendra," he replied, his voice suddenly thick with predatory excitement. I paced across the ruined living room, stepping over a puddle of unknown sticky liquid. 10-day close, I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the large space. "All cash. The property is sold completely as is. No structural inspections, no environmental contingencies, and absolutely no haggling over the closing costs. You want the land, you take it exactly as it sits right this second." There was a heavy pause on the line. Marcus was a seasoned shark in the commercial real estate world, but even sharks needed a moment to process blood in the water. While he put me on a brief hold to consult his regional vice president, I walked over to the antique console table. I stared at the framed wedding photo Terrence had prominently displayed right next to a stack of Trent's ridiculous crypto investment brochures. Selling a marital home in the state of Georgia usually required both spouses to sign off regardless of whose name was officially on the deed. It was a standard legal protection designed to prevent exactly the kind of unilateral asset dumping I was currently executing. But Terrence, in his infinite financial wisdom, had handed me the ultimate loophole on a silver platter. 3 years ago, my real estate limited liability company took a temporary hit during a nationwide market correction. It was a normal fluctuation, something every seasoned investor anticipates and plans for. But to Trent, a man who considered a lucky night at the casino a solid retirement strategy, it looked like impending financial ruin. Trent convinced Terrence that my corporate structures were a massive tax trap. He fed my husband a steady diet of meaningless business buzzwords about liability exposure and asset vulnerability. Terrence, terrified that my temporary dip might somehow threaten his precious annual corporate bonuses, completely panicked. He did not ask how he could help me. He did not offer to support my business through a slow quarter. Instead, he hired a cheap internet lawyer to draft an ironclad post-nuptial agreement. He practically shoved the pen into my hand, demanding we legally sever all our assets to protect his wealth. He formally and permanently waived any and all rights to my businesses, my investment portfolio, and the primary residence which had been purchased exclusively through my limited liability company. He thought he was building a fortress to protect his own money from my perceived failure. In reality, he had locked himself out of the castle entirely. His sheer arrogance, combined with Trent's profound ignorance of property law, had given me a weapon of mass destruction. Marcus came back on the line, his voice tight with suppressed adrenaline. Kendra, a 10-day close is incredibly aggressive for a residential teardown. We usually need 30 days just to clear the bureaucratic red tape with the county zoning board. I do not care what you usually need, Marcus, I countered smoothly, refusing to give an inch of ground. I know for a fact your primary investor wants to break ground on the south sector before the new financial quarter begins. My double lot is the only thing standing between you and a massive performance bonus. You have the corporate cash reserves. I want $1.2 million wired directly into my private corporate account. If you cannot make it happen by next week, I will call your direct competitor who has been circling the perimeter of your project since March. I could practically hear him doing the math in his head. 1.2 million was a premium price, but it was a total fraction of the profit Apex stood to make once they erected 6 luxury townhomes on my land. I was offering them the golden ticket, and I was offering it with 0 strings attached. I did not care if they found mold in the drywall. I did not care if the roof needed replacing. They were going to bulldoze the entire structure anyway. The negotiations lasted exactly 4 minutes. I was not asking for a favor, I was dictating reality. "We can meet your price, Kendra," Marcus finally said, the sound of furious typing echoing through the receiver. 1.2 million all cash. We will waive all inspections and take the property exactly as is. But if we are committing to a 10-day close, there is one massive non-negotiable condition on our end. I narrowed my eyes, watching a drop of spilled beer soak into my custom-imported rug. Name it. Our demolition permits for that specific neighborhood grid are already approved and strictly time-sensitive. He explained, his tone shifting into rapid-fire corporate logistics. We have heavy machinery scheduled to arrive in that sector. We cannot afford any delays or neighborhood pushbacks. If we wire the funds, we need the property completely vacant. No furniture, no moving boxes, no lingering residents. The lot must be entirely cleared out and ready for immediate demolition in exactly 9 days. If there is so much as a stray couch left inside, the deal is completely off. I stopped pacing. I looked at the digital calendar application open on my laptop screen. Terrence, Brenda, Chloe, and Trent had booked a lavish 10-day stay in Cabo. They were scheduled to land back at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in exactly 10 days. 9 days from now, my husband and his toxic family would still be sipping expensive cocktails on a Mexican beach, completely oblivious to the world shifting beneath their feet. 9 days meant I had just enough time to pack up the things that truly mattered, secure a premium apartment for my son, and strip this massive house down to the studs. On the 10th day, they would pull up to this address, expecting to walk into the luxury home they had stolen my money to maintain. Instead, they would find a pile of splintered wood and a team of bulldozers leveling the ground. "Send the contracts to my secure email immediately," I told Marcus, my voice dripping with absolute cold satisfaction. The property will be completely vacant and ready for the wrecking ball in 9 days. I ended the call with Marcus and set my phone down on the kitchen island. The marble surface was cold under my fingertips, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat outside. The house was entirely silent now. The frat party soundtrack was gone, replaced only by the soft, rhythmic breathing of my son sleeping in his carrier. I carefully lifted Malik and walked down the hallway to my home office, moving with deliberate slowness to protect my healing surgical incision. I set his carrier gently onto the plush rug near my desk, powered up my laptop, and picked up my phone again. It was time to deploy the heavy artillery. I bypassed my recent contacts and scrolled down to the V section. Valerie was not just a divorce attorney, she was a legally sanctioned predator operating in the highest echelons of Atlanta corporate and family law. She was the woman executives hired when they wanted to completely obliterate their spouses, and she was the woman spouses hired when they wanted to take the executives for every dime they possessed. I had retained her firm for a complex commercial zoning dispute 2 years ago, and we had maintained a fierce mutual respect ever since. Valerie answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert, despite it being a Saturday afternoon. "Valerie, I need you to initiate a divorce filing immediately," I said, keeping my voice as clinical as if I were ordering office supplies. "I need an emergency ex parte order, freezing all marital accounts, and I need to establish a temporary child support and custody order citing spousal abandonment." There was a brief pause on the line. I heard the distinct sound of a leather chair squeaking as Valerie physically adjusted her posture, shifting instantly into battle mode. "Kendra, you just had a baby 3 days ago," she said, her tone entirely professional, but laced with sharp curiosity. "What exactly happened?" I gave her the completely unvarnished facts. I detailed how Terrence had changed the smart lock code while I was at the hospital recovering from an emergency C-section. I explained the Cabo vacation funded by my stolen maternity leave savings. I described the 4 intoxicated men I just had removed from my living room by the local police. I delivered the information without a single tear or crack in my voice. Emotion was a liability in legal proceedings, and I needed Valerie to see exactly how lucid and focused I was. Valerie let out a low whistle that conveyed genuine shock. She had seen the darkest corners of failed marriages, but the sheer brazenness of Terrence's actions was staggering even to her. "He drained the joint savings yesterday." Valerie confirmed, her keyboard already clacking rapidly in the background as she began drafting the emergency motions. "We are filing for an immediate freeze on all his personal accounts to prevent him from moving that money any further. The judge will grant the emergency custody and support orders by Monday morning based on the police report from today and his international absence. But Kendra, we need to talk about the primary residence. If his name is on that deed, liquidating the marital home becomes incredibly complicated." "He does not have a single legal claim to this property," I replied, leaning back in my office chair and feeling a profound sense of vindication wash over me. "Pull up the post-nuptial agreement your firm filed for me 3 years ago." I heard Valerie clicking through her digital archives. A few seconds later, she let out a sharp bark of laughter. The sound echoed through the phone, rich with predatory delight. "I remember this document, Kendra. I still use it as a case study for new associates on how sheer arrogance can destroy a person's financial future." 3 years ago, Terrence had decided to play the role of the savvy financial patriarch, heavily influenced by the toxic whispers of his brother-in-law. Trent, who had never successfully run a business in his life, fancied himself an expert on corporate liability. During a temporary nationwide dip in commercial real estate values, Trent convinced Terrence that my limited liability company was a ticking time bomb. He used a lot of aggressive business jargon, claiming my corporate structures were a tax trap that would inevitably bleed into Terrence's personal assets and threaten his precious annual corporate bonuses. Terrence had panicked. Instead of standing by his wife or understanding the very basic principles of market fluctuation, he demanded absolute protection. He brought me a post-nuptial agreement drafted by some cheap internet legal service Trent had found. The document explicitly, legally, and permanently severed his financial profile from mine. He formally waived any and all rights to my businesses, my investment portfolios, and the primary residence, which was owned entirely by my company. He had practically shoved the pen into my hand, desperate to shield his mediocre wealth from my perceived failure. I had taken the document straight to Valerie, who had completely rewritten it to make it absolutely ironclad, securing my assets in a fortress of legalese Terrence was too lazy to actually read before signing. He literally signed away his right to a $1.2 million property to protect a $20,000 annual bonus, Valerie said, her voice thick with amusement. It is a masterpiece of financial cowardice. The house is an asset of your company, Kendra. You can sell it, burn it, or paint it neon pink, and he cannot do a single thing to stop you. I just agreed to an all-cash teardown offer from Apex developers, I told her, watching my laptop screen as Valerie's emails began hitting my inbox. 10-day close. The wrecking balls arrive in 9 days. Valerie actually gasped. The sheer ruthless perfection of the timeline was not lost on her. You are demolishing the house the day before he flies back from Cabo. She summarized, her tone bordering on reverence. Kendra, you do not need a lawyer, you need an executioner, and I am happy to play the part. I am sending the digital documents over right now. Read them, sign them, and I will have the emergency motions on the judge's desk before court opens on Monday. I opened the secure portal Valerie sent over. The legal documents were cold and precise. They outlined the immediate dissolution of my marriage, the emergency protection of my remaining assets, and the formal documentation of Terrence's financial and physical abandonment. I scrolled to the bottom of the first page, placing my electronic signature on the line. As I moved to the second document to authorize the asset freeze, my phone screen illuminated with an incoming text message. It was an international number. Brenda had apparently found another phone to use since I had blocked her primary line. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the message, her toxic entitlement burning through every single word. Since you are home doing nothing, Trent needs you to overnight his custom golf shoes to the resort. He left them in the hall closet. Put the shipping on your card. Terrence is very disappointed in your behavior today. Do not make things worse for yourself by ignoring this. I stopped reading. I sat completely still in the quiet, cool air of my office. I had just undergone major surgery. I was caring for a newborn baby completely alone. My husband had stolen the money meant to feed his own son to fund this exact vacation. He had allowed strangers to violate the sanctity of my home. And his mother truly, genuinely believed that my proper place in this dynamic was to serve as an unpaid delivery service for her grifter son-in-law. She thought she could snap her fingers and command me to spend my own money to ship custom golf shoes to a luxury resort in Mexico. They did not just view me as a bank account, they viewed me as the help. A slow, lethal smile spread across my face, the kind of smile that promised absolute total devastation. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt free. I picked up the phone and typed out my reply, my thumbs moving quickly and efficiently. Sure thing, Brenda. Taking care of his belongings right now. I hit send and immediately blocked the new number. I tossed the phone onto the desk and opened a new tab on my laptop browser. I did not search for international overnight shipping rates. I pulled up the website for Atlanta's most aggressive premium white glove moving and packing service. They were expensive, they were fast, and they asked no questions. I typed my address into the booking portal and selected the absolute earliest available time slot for the following morning. I requested a massive crew and 2 commercial-sized moving trucks. I checked the box for full-service packing, instructing them to box up every single item in the house. I was not just moving my clothes and my son's nursery furniture. I was going to strip this entire property down to the bare drywall. Every piece of custom furniture, every expensive appliance, every single item Terrence claimed to own was going into a dark, climate-controlled storage unit under my corporate name. Trent would not be getting his custom golf shoes. Terrence would not be getting his designer suits or his expensive watch collection. They were going to return from their 5-star Mexican getaway to find a demolished lot and absolutely zero access to their previous lives. I clicked confirm on the booking, securing the crew for 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. I finalized my signature on the divorce papers, closed the laptop, and picked up my sleeping son. It was time to start packing. Precisely at 7 in the morning, the deep guttural rumble of twin diesel engines vibrated through the floorboards of my foyer. Two massive, pristine white moving trucks backed into the driveway, their reverse alarms cutting through the quiet suburban morning. I was already dressed, fueled by black coffee and the sheer intoxicating adrenaline of total liberation. Malik was safely strapped into his infant carrier on the kitchen island, blissfully asleep, while I stood at the front door with a clipboard and a box of heavy-duty industrial trash bags. The foreman, a burly man named Jackson, stepped up to the porch and handed me a digital tablet for my signature. I had paid for their absolute premium package. That meant 20 men packing materials, and a guarantee that the house would be completely hollowed out by sundown. "Where do we start, ma'am?" Jackson asked, looking past me into the living room that still smelled faintly of stale beer from the previous day's frat party invasion. "We triage first," I told him, my voice crisp and authoritative. "Everything in the master bedroom closet on the left side, the nursery, and my home office goes into the heavy-duty cardboard boxes. Use bubble wrap, take your time, and load those specifically into the first truck. That truck is heading to a secure corporate storage facility in downtown Atlanta." I had already spent the hours between midnight and dawn packing my absolute essentials. My limited liability company documents the deed to the house, Malik's birth certificate, my passports, and my personal jewelry were securely locked inside a fireproof safe currently sitting in the trunk of my SUV. I was leaving nothing to chance, and absolutely nothing to Terrence. "Understood," Jackson said, signaling to his crew. "And what about the rest of the house?" I handed him the massive box of contractor-grade garbage bags. "Everything else goes into these. I do not care what it is. I do not care what it costs. Do not fold it, do not wrap it, do not organize it. Just sweep it into the bags and throw it into the second truck." Jackson raised an eyebrow, but he was a professional who was being paid triple his usual hourly rate. He simply nodded and blew a whistle, sending a swarm of movers into the house. I stood in the doorway of the master suite and watched with cold, methodical satisfaction as the physical manifestations of my husband's vanity were unceremoniously dumped into black plastic. Terrence was a man who obsessed over appearances. His side of our massive walk-in closet looked like a luxury menswear boutique. He owned dozens of tailored Italian suits, silk pocket squares, and an entire wall dedicated to expensive leather dress shoes and velvet loafers. He would regularly spend $2,000 on a custom jacket, while simultaneously demanding I justify spending $50 on premium organic baby formula. Now those $1,000 jackets were being ripped off their cedar hangers and shoved into garbage bags. His expensive collection of automatic watches stored in a velvet-lined display case was dumped into a plastic bag and tossed in right on top of his shoes. The movers moved swiftly down the hall to the guest room, which had effectively become a storage unit for Trent and Brenda. Because Trent and Chloe lived in a cramped, rented apartment that Terrence secretly subsidized, Trent kept his oversized recreational gear at my house. His custom-fitted monogrammed golf clubs, the exact ones Brenda had the sheer audacity to demand I overnight to Mexico, were dragged out of the closet. The heavy leather golf bag was tossed down the stairs, the metal clubs clanking loudly against each other before being dragged out the front door. Next came Brenda's heirlooms. My mother-in-law had a terrible habit of buying hideous, overpriced porcelain figurines and faux antique lamps from estate sales. Whenever she ran out of space in her own home, she would bring boxes of them over to my house, insisting I display them. When I refused, she stacked them in our guest bedroom closet, treating my luxury property like her personal attic. The movers did not bother with packing peanuts. They simply upended the boxes into the black bags. The satisfying crunch of shattering porcelain echoed down the hallway. I was not destroying their property with a sledgehammer. That would be a tactical error, one that could invite a civil lawsuit for destruction of assets. I was far too legally savvy to hand Terrence ammunition for our impending divorce. I was simply relocating his belongings with extreme prejudice. Earlier that morning, I had made a phone call to Valerie, my ruthless, high-powered divorce attorney. Valerie was a legally sanctioned predator operating in the highest echelons of Atlanta corporate and family law. I gave her the completely unvarnished facts regarding Terrence changing the locks, stealing my maternity funds, and abandoning me days after major surgery. We immediately drafted divorce papers, filed for an emergency ex parte order, freezing all of Kendra's remaining personal accounts, and initiated a strict child support and temporary custody order, citing spousal abandonment. Terrence's financial pipeline was being clamped shut forever. By 2 in the afternoon, the second moving truck was completely packed with black bags containing every single item Terrence, Trent, and Brenda claimed to own. I secured Malik in my vehicle, locked the front door of the empty house, and led the moving truck on a 40-minute drive out of the affluent suburbs and deep into the industrial outskirts of the city. The storage facility I had selected was a sprawling, desolate lot surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing and razor wire. The ground was cracked concrete radiating the blistering Georgia heat directly upward. There was no security guard, no keypad entry, and absolutely no climate control. It was a grid of cheap corrugated metal tin cans baking under the brutal summer sun. I walked into the dingy front office. The air conditioning was broken, and a bored teenager was scrolling on her phone behind bulletproof glass. I slid a prepaid debit card through the slot and filled out the rental agreement. I did not use my real name. I used the name Brenda Trent, a petty but highly satisfying combination, and listed a fake forwarding address. I paid for exactly 1 month of rent up front. No autopay, no renewal contract. In 30 days, if they did not retrieve their belongings, the facility would legally auction off the unit to the highest bidder. I unlocked Unit 4B and signaled the movers. They formed a chain, tossing the heavy black garbage bags directly onto the dusty concrete floor. The heat inside the metal unit was instantly suffocating easily, topping 110 degrees. It felt like an oven. I stood back and watched. The oppressive, stagnant heat would warp Trent's custom golf clubs within a week. The humidity would permanently ruin the soles of Terrence's expensive Italian loafers and breed mold deep within the fabric of his tailored suits. Brenda's remaining porcelain junk would be baked into a dusty, melted mess alongside Terrence's high-end gaming consoles. I was fulfilling my legal obligation to preserve his property while ensuring that nature effectively destroyed it for me. I pulled the rolling metal door down the rusted hinges, shrieking in protest, and snapped a heavy brass padlock into place. I slipped the single silver key into my pocket. Terrence would get this key handed to him by Valerie during our first divorce hearing. I drove back to the property to oversee the final phase of the extraction. The first truck containing my valuables and my son's nursery had already departed for my secure, climate-controlled facility downtown. The house was now completely hollow. The walls echoed with every footstep. The massive custom-built living room where Terrence loved to hold court was reduced to bare hardwood floors and stripped windows. The luxury appliances were gone. The imported rugs were gone. It was just a shell perfectly primed and ready for apex developers to bring in the demolition crew. I stood in the center of the empty kitchen holding Malik, feeling the quiet magnitude of what I had accomplished in just 24 hours. I had surgically excised a cancer from my life. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Valerie had explicitly instructed me to temporarily unblock Terrence's primary number to document his exact whereabouts and spending habits for the emergency spousal abandonment filing. I pulled the phone out and looked at the screen. Terrence had sent a text message. He was not asking about our newborn son. He was not checking to see if I was recovering from my surgery. He was not even asking if the police had actually arrested his fraternity brothers. It was a high-resolution photograph. The image showed a massive, perfectly seared tomahawk steak sitting on a wooden cutting board, surrounded by grilled lobster tails and 2 salt-rimmed margaritas. The background featured the sparkling infinity pool of the Cabo San Lucas resort, overlooking the deep blue ocean. It was an extravagant $500 dinner paid for using the money he had stolen from his infant son's college fund. Beneath the photo, his text message was perfectly clear, radiating the smug, untouchable arrogance of a man who firmly believed he had broken his wife into submission. Learn to be a team player, and maybe you can come next time. I stared at the glowing screen. A cold, lethal smile spread across my face, touching the corners of my eyes. Terrence thought he was teaching me a lesson in respect. He thought he was starving me out, forcing me to sit in an empty, quiet house and reflect on my disobedience while he lived like a king on my dime. Sure thing? I typed back, my thumbs moving with deliberate, unhurried precision. Taking care of his belongings right now. I hit send, locked the screen, and walked out the front door of the hollow house. I did not look back. The drive into downtown Atlanta was the most peaceful 40 minutes I had experienced in years. The heavy, humid suburban air gave way to the towering glass and steel canyons of the city's financial district. I pulled my SUV into the secure underground parking garage of the Sovereign Tower, a premium high-rise where my firm managed a portfolio of luxury executive suites. The attendant recognized my vehicle, immediately waving me through the VIP gate with a respectful nod. There were no frat boys here. There were no entitled mother-in-laws dropping off boxes of junk. There was only multi-tiered biometric security, 24-hour concierge service, and absolute, impenetrable silence. I parked in my reserved spot, carefully lifted Malik in his carrier, and swiped my corporate access fob in the private elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing us off from the rest of the world, and we shot upward to the 42nd floor. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. I stepped off the marble threshold and let out a long, shuddering breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 years. The suite was a masterpiece of modern design. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the Atlanta skyline, the city lights just beginning to flicker on against the fading orange dusk. The air conditioning was a whisper-quiet perfection, maintaining a crisp, refreshing 70 degrees. The furnishings were sleek, imported, and meticulously clean. It was a corporate asset meant to woo international executives, but for the next few weeks it was my fortress. The moving crew had already delivered my essentials. My clothes were neatly hung in the master walk-in closet. Malik's bassinet was set up in the corner of the sprawling bedroom, draped in soft, clean linens. I set the carrier down, unbuckled my sleeping son, and gently laid him in the bassinet. He stretched his tiny arms, let out a soft sigh, and settled instantly. For the first time since my emergency surgery, I allowed myself to truly rest. I sank into the deep, plush cushions of the living room sofa. My abdominal incision throbbed, a dull, persistent burn reminding me of my physical limits, but the mental weight that had been crushing my chest was completely gone. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was magnificent. There was no Terrence pacing the floor complaining about his bonus. There was no Trent pitching his latest delusional cryptocurrency scam. There was just me, my son, and the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. I reached for my phone, remembering Valerie's strict instructions to monitor Terrence's communication for our spousal abandonment and financial dissipation filings. I had temporarily unblocked his number and the toxic family group chat simply to gather evidence. I did not have to wait long. The screen lit up with a rapid succession of notifications. Chloe was dominating the text thread. Even through a digital screen, her sheer entitlement was exhausting. "This resort is completely incompetent," she typed, followed by 3 angry red emojis. I asked for fresh towels 30 minutes ago, and they brought the wrong size. And the poolside service is practically non-existent. I cannot believe we are paying for this level of mediocrity. The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost comedic. Chloe was not paying for a single drop of water at that resort. Terrence was paying for it, using the money he stole from my maternity fund. "Terrence, we need to salvage this trip," Chloe's next text read. "Trent met a promoter at the Cabana Bar who hooks up VIPs with private yacht excursions. It is only $6,000 for the day. We need to book it for tomorrow before someone else takes it." I watched the screen, waiting for my husband to set a boundary. To tell his sister that they were already bleeding money, that they needed to budget, that spending $6,000 to ride a boat was insane. Instead, Terrence's reply popped up 3 minutes later. "Let me check my balances," Terrence wrote. "I transferred a lot to Trent yesterday for the coin launch. I might have to pull from a different account." Sighing. Chloe's response was instantaneous, completely devoid of empathy or logic. "Just use Kendra's black card. She is literally sitting at home doing nothing right now. Tell her it is for family bonding. She can pay off the balance when she goes back to work." I sat in the cool, silent penthouse holding my phone completely detached from their shared delusion. A year ago, reading those words would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety and anger. I would have drafted a dozen different responses trying to defend my hard work, trying to make them understand my value. Now, I just felt a profound, chilling indifference. They were parasites feeding off each other's delusions of grandeur, floating on a raft of my money while completely oblivious to the fact that I had just pulled the plug. I took screenshots of every single message, making sure the timestamps were clearly visible, and forwarded the entire thread directly to Valerie's secure email. It was perfect evidence of their financial recklessness and their utter disregard for my well-being. As I sent the final screenshot, an incoming call overrode the screen. It was Valerie. I answered immediately, sitting up a little straighter despite the pull on my stitches. "Tell me you have good news," I said, looking out at the glittering city skyline. "I have the best news," Valerie replied, her voice practically humming with predatory satisfaction. "The title company just cleared the fast-track paperwork. Apex developers pulled every string they had with their corporate bank. The deed transfer is fully processed on their end, and they are bypassing the standard escrow hold. They are terrified you might change your mind and field that competing offer. They are ready to close right this second." I opened my laptop, resting it gently on the glass coffee table. I logged into my secure email server. The digital document package from Apex was waiting in my inbox. It was the final bill of sale. $1.2 million, all cash, zero contingencies, with the strict stipulation that the lot must be entirely vacant for demolition. I clicked the link, opening the electronic signature portal. I reviewed the terms one last time. There was no hesitation. There was no sentimental attachment to the hardwood floors I had picked out or the kitchen cabinets I had imported. That house was a monument to a marriage that never truly existed. It was a museum of Terrence's vanity, and I was shutting it down. I typed my name into the digital signature box, applying my certified electronic seal to the bottom of the contract. I hit the submit button. "It is signed and sent," I told Valerie. "Hold the line," she commanded. "Let us make sure the wire hits. We are not celebrating until the money is resting safely in your vault." I opened a new tab and logged into the brand new, highly encrypted personal banking account I had opened yesterday afternoon, an account legally shielded behind my corporate LLC, completely invisible to Terrence, and untouched by the pending divorce asset freeze. The screen loaded. For 3 agonizing seconds, the balance showed a meager $100 initial deposit. Then the page refreshed automatically. A bright green notification banner dropped down from the top of the screen. "Incoming wire transfer. Complete Apex Commercial Holdings, LLC." I stared at the numbers. They were beautiful, crisp, and absolute. $1,200, 100.00. It is there. I breathed, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. The entire amount. Valerie let out a sharp, victorious laugh. "Excellent work, Kendra. I am officially forwarding the executed deed to the county registrar. You are no longer a homeowner in the suburbs. And I just received confirmation from the project manager at Apex. The demolition permits are fully activated. The heavy machinery is being deployed to the site as we speak. The bulldozers have the green light." I closed my laptop and looked over at Malik, who was sleeping soundly, completely unaware that his mother had just secured his future by burning his father's past to ash. "Let them tear it down," I said quietly into the phone. "Let them turn it all to dust." Terrence was currently sitting by a pool in Mexico, stressing over how to afford a $6,000 yacht excursion for his entitled sister, completely unaware that he was officially a homeless man. The suburban castle he loved to brag about was dead, and the wrecking balls were scheduled to swing exactly 24 hours before his flight touched down in Atlanta. The morning of the 9th day broke with a brilliant, clear sky over the Atlanta skyline. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corporate penthouse holding Malik in my arms and watched the city wake up beneath us. The profound, absolute silence of the secure suite was a stark contrast to the chaotic, frantic energy that had defined my life just over a week ago. There were no unexpected visitors demanding my attention. There were no inebriated fraternity brothers sleeping on my imported furniture. There was only the gentle hum of the climate control system and the solid, undeniable weight of the $1.2 million resting securely in my private, isolated bank account. Valerie had worked through the weekend with the terrifying efficiency of a seasoned predator. The emergency ex parte order freezing Terrence's remaining accounts had been signed by a judge who was deeply unimpressed by a man funding a luxury international vacation while abandoning his recovering wife and 3-day-old infant. The temporary child support and custody orders were fully locked in place. The deed to the suburban house was legally transferred and recorded with the county. I no longer owned the property. I had completely successfully and legally liquidated the biggest liability in my portfolio. But reading the final confirmation emails from the title company was not enough for me. I needed a visceral physical confirmation that the chapter was permanently closed. I needed to see the execution with my own 2 eyes. I dressed in a sharp, tailored linen suit, strapped Malik into his premium car seat, and took the private elevator down to the secure underground garage. I had hired a private executive car service for the morning. I did not want to drive my own SUV into my former neighborhood. I wanted to sit in the back of a tinted chauffeured town car and observe the destruction like a passing ghost. The driver, a quiet professional in a dark suit, opened the door for me and smoothly merged into the morning traffic. The drive from the financial district out to the affluent, sprawling suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. I spent the entire ride enjoying the cool air conditioning and the smooth leather seats, feeling a sense of deep, profound closure settling into my bones. As the town car turned onto my old street, the familiar manicured lawns and pristine brick facades of the neighborhood rolled past the tinted windows. Terrence loved this street. He loved the prestige of the zip code and the outward projection of immense wealth. He loved standing at the end of the driveway with his hands on his hips, greeting the neighbors and acting as though he had single-handedly constructed the entire subdivision. He completely ignored the fact that my corporate entity paid the mortgage, the property taxes, and the exorbitant monthly homeowner association fees. He simply wanted the stage. The car slowed to a crawl as we approached the end of the cul-de-sac, and my breath caught in my throat. Apex developers did not waste a single second of their 10-day closing window. They operated with a ruthless, aggressive corporate efficiency that was genuinely awe-inspiring to witness. The property was already completely unrecognizable. The custom landscaping that Terrence loved to brag about, the perfectly edged Bermuda grass, and the mature imported Japanese maples had been brutally ripped to shreds. Massive, heavy-duty tractor treads had churned the pristine front lawn into a chaotic landscape of thick red Georgia mud. 2 massive industrial dumpsters sat directly in the center of the ruined driveway, overflowing with shattered drywall and broken timber. The house itself looked like a hollowed-out skull. The development crew had completely stripped the exterior. The imported mahogany front door, which Terrence had specifically insisted we special order to impress a senior vice president at his firm, was completely gone, its frame left as a gaping, jagged hole. Every single custom window had been popped out of its casing. The expensive plantation shutters were gone. The designer light fixtures, the brass house numbers, the heavy copper mailbox, everything had been brutally and efficiently unhinged and discarded. A crew of men in hard hats and neon safety vests swarmed the property, moving with rapid, synchronized purpose. They were actively wrapping the entire perimeter of the double lot in a 10-foot-high heavy-duty chain-link fence. A massive green privacy screen was being stretched across the metal links, effectively cutting the property off from the rest of the neighborhood. Right in the center of the fencing, a massive glossy white and black sign had been bolted into place. It read, "Future site of Apex Luxury Townhomes. Demolition in progress." I asked the driver to pull over to the curb and idle the engine. I sat in the plush back seat of the black car, cradling my sleeping son, and stared at the hollow shell of my former life. I did not feel a single ounce of regret or sentimentality. Seeing the physical structure dismantled felt like watching a massive heavy chain being cut from around my neck. Terrence had traded his legal rights to this kingdom to protect a mediocre annual bonus, and now his kingdom was literally being ground into mulch. While I was watching a worker take a sledgehammer to the remaining brickwork of the front porch, my phone vibrated sharply against the leather seat. I picked it up and saw the notification. It was the toxic family group chat. I had specifically unmuted the conversation on Valerie's strict orders to capture every single piece of evidence regarding their spending habits and travel logistics for the impending court dates. The level of sheer audacious entitlement radiating from the screen was breathtaking. They were currently sitting in the VIP departure lounge of the Cabo San Lucas Airport, preparing for their return flight to Atlanta, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire reality had been bulldozed into the earth. Chloe initiated the rapid-fire exchange. "This airport lounge is absolutely disgusting," she typed, sending a photo of a half-empty mimosa. "The Wi-Fi is slow, and the service is completely incompetent. Terrence, you need to use Kendra's card to upgrade us to first class for the flight back. I am not sitting in the main cabin next to a crying baby." I stared at the message, shaking my head in mild amusement. Chloe was demanding my money to upgrade a flight she did not pay for, all while insulting the concept of a crying baby, while my actual newborn son slept peacefully in my arms. Brenda immediately chimed in her message, dripping with the same demanding arrogance she had utilized for the past 4 years. "Do not bother with the upgrade, Chloe. We are already boarding in 20 minutes. Trent, make sure you ask the flight attendant to store my fragile resort souvenirs in the front closet." Kendra: "I hope you went grocery shopping. We are exhausted and starving." Trent sent a thumbs-up emoji, followed by his own directive. "Kendra, make sure my golf clubs are polished and ready by the front door. I have a tea time with some potential crypto investors tomorrow morning." They were trapped in a profound collective delusion. They genuinely firmly believed that the world revolved entirely around their desires. They believed I was currently sitting in the suburban house, completely subdued and eagerly awaiting their return so I could resume my role as their personal chef maid and bank account. Then came the final message from Terrence. It was the ultimate display of patriarchal arrogance from a man who possessed zero actual power. "Flight lands tomorrow at 3 p.m. Terrence dictated, his words popping up in a harsh blue bubble on my screen. "Bring the SUV to the international terminal, Kendra. Mom wants a pot roast ready when we get to the house. Make sure the guest room is set up with fresh linens. We are tired and we do not want to deal with any of your postpartum attitude." I sat back against the cool, luxurious leather of the chauffeured car. I reached into the small built-in console beside me and pulled out a chilled bottle of sparkling water. I unscrewed the cap and took a slow, refreshing sip, letting the crisp carbonation cool my throat. I looked out the tinted window. A massive yellow excavator had just rolled off a flatbed trailer and was currently positioning its massive metal claw directly over the roof of the master bedroom. I set the water bottle down and picked up my phone. I did not type out a long, angry paragraph. I did not list the reasons why I was leaving. I did not tell them that the locks were gone, the windows were smashed, and their belongings were currently baking in a rusted tin can on the edge of the city. I simply gave them exactly the kind of polite, submissive response they expected right before walking into a wood chipper. "No worries," I typed, my thumbs moving with fluid, calculated grace. "Have a safe flight." I hit send, watched the message deliver to the group, and locked the screen. I tapped the privacy glass separating me from the driver. "We can head back to the penthouse now," I said, my voice steady and clear. The view here is perfectly clear. The sliding glass doors of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport parted, releasing Terrence and his toxic entourage into the suffocating embrace of the mid-July Atlanta heat. The humidity was an absolute physical force, instantly plastering Terrence's expensive vacation linen shirt to his sweating back. He stood at the commercial arrivals curb, surrounded by a mountain of ridiculous designer luggage. There were 6 oversized suitcases, 3 heavy garment bags containing his custom resort wear, and 5 separate shopping bags stuffed with the overpriced souvenirs Brenda had demanded he buy for her friends back home. 30 minutes passed, then 45. The blistering sun beat down on the concrete, turning the crowded passenger pickup lane into a literal oven. Brenda was fanning her face with a duty-free magazine, complaining loudly to anyone who would listen that her feet were swelling and her blood sugar was dropping. Chloe was aggressively tapping her phone screen, furious that the airport cellular service was preventing her from uploading her final vacation photos. Trent was leaning heavily against a concrete traffic pillar, whining about the intense humidity ruining the leather on his imported travel shoes. Terrence paced the length of the curb, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He dialed my number for the 4th consecutive time. Miles away, high above the miserable, sweltering city grid, I was sitting on a plush velvet sofa in the Sovereign Tower penthouse. The climate control was set to a crisp, refreshing 68 degrees. The soft, sophisticated notes of a jazz saxophone played smoothly through the integrated ceiling speakers. Malik was cooing happily on his interactive playmat, completely safe and perfectly content. I picked up the phone on the 5th ring. "Where are you?" Terrence screamed the second the connection went live. His voice was completely frantic, cracking under the weight of his own profound entitlement. "We have been standing at this curb for over an hour. Mom's feet are swelling and she is practically fainting from the heat. I told you to bring the massive SUV. We have too many bags to fit into a normal sedan." I took a slow sip of my iced lemon water, letting his manic aggressive energy hang in the cool, peaceful air of my living room. "I told you I wasn't picking you up," I replied, my voice floating over the line with the cold, absolute detachment of an automated corporate message. "Try an Uber." I heard Brenda shriek in the background, her sharp voice piercing right through the phone speaker. "What did she just say, Terrence? Do not tell me that girl is refusing to pick up her own husband and mother-in-law. You tell that disrespectful wife of yours to get the car right now. I want my pot roast and I want to lie down in a proper bed." I did not give him the chance to translate his mother's demands. I pressed the red button terminating the call and dropped the phone back onto the glass coffee table. Down at the airport, Terrence stared at his darkened phone screen, completely unhinged by the sheer audacity of my refusal. He was vibrating with a toxic mixture of embarrassment and rage. He had spent the entire 10-day vacation performing the role of the wealthy, powerful patriarch for his mother and sister, and now he was standing on a filthy public curb, sweating through his designer clothes, while his family watched his authority completely crumble. Furious, he opened a ride-sharing application and ordered the most expensive luxury vehicle available. The surge pricing for a premium sport utility vehicle at the height of afternoon airport traffic was astronomical, but Terrence did not care. He was spending money that no longer existed in his accounts. When the sleek black vehicle finally arrived, the driver took one look at their massive pile of luggage and immediately charged them an oversized baggage fee. Terrence spent the entire 45-minute ride north complaining about the cost, the traffic, and my terrible attitude. He sat in the front passenger seat, gripping the leather door handle and making loud, aggressive promises to the back rows. "I am putting her in her place the absolute second I unlock that front door." Terrence practically growled, speaking just loud enough to ensure the driver felt thoroughly uncomfortable. "She thinks because she had a baby, she can sit around the house acting like royalty while I pay the mortgage. This entire vacation was supposed to be a peaceful family retreat, and she has completely ruined the ending. I am cutting off her credit cards tomorrow morning, Trent. She needs a harsh reality check." Trent nodded vigorously from the back seat, completely validating his brother-in-law's delusional tirade. "You have to assert dominance, Terrence. You let her control too much of the financial narrative. That is exactly why I told you to sign those postnuptial documents. You have to protect the family wealth from her emotional instability." Brenda chimed in from the 3rd row, massaging her swollen ankles. "Make sure she has my bedroom set up, Terrence. I am not lifting a single finger today. If she did not cook the pot roast like I asked, we are ordering premium steakhouse delivery, and she is paying for it." The luxury vehicle exited the highway and glided smoothly onto the familiar tree-lined streets of my former suburban neighborhood. The manicured lawns and pristine brick facades of the surrounding homes rolled past the tinted windows. Terence visibly relaxed, adjusting his collar and preparing to step back into his suburban kingdom. He loved the moment when guests saw the sprawling property for the first time. He loved the heavy wooden front door, the custom landscaping, and the sheer physical presence of the house he pretended to own. The driver slowed the vehicle to a crawl, tapping his digital navigation screen with a confused frown. "Keep going," Terence instructed, pointing a rigid finger toward the end of the street. "It is the massive double-lot property at the very end of the cul-de-sac. You cannot miss it." The driver brought the heavy vehicle to a complete and sudden stop. He shifted the car into park and looked out the passenger window. "This is the exact global positioning coordinate you entered into the application, sir," the driver stated, his voice tight with professional caution. Terence let out an exasperated sigh, muttering about incompetent drivers, and aggressively pushed his door open. He stepped out onto the asphalt, ready to point out his magnificent home. He froze. The blood drained instantly from his face, leaving him looking like a hollowed-out mannequin. His customized leather travel bag slipped from his fingers, hitting the pavement with a dull, heavy thud. The manicured lawn was completely gone. In its place was a chaotic, churning sea of thick red Georgia mud, violently scored by massive industrial tractor treads. The custom-imported Japanese maples had been ripped from the earth by their roots, leaving deep, jagged craters in the soil. The beautiful brick walkway leading up to the grand entrance had been pulverized into fine dust. And the house. Terence stared at the structure, his mouth opening and closing in absolute silent horror. It was a gutted, hollowed-out corpse. The roof was completely gone, exposing the wooden support beams to the open sky. The massive custom windows had been ripped from their frames, leaving dark, empty square holes staring blindly out at the street. The front door was gone. The porch was a pile of splintered wood and crushed concrete. The entire double-lot property was wrapped in a 10-foot-high, heavy-duty chain-link fence, secured by thick steel cables. Trent scrambled out of the back seat, nearly tripping over his own feet, as he took in the scene of total devastation. Brenda pressed her face against the tinted glass of the SUV, her jaw dropping open, as she hyperventilated, clutching her chest in a dramatic display of panic. Terence refused to process the reality standing right in front of his eyes. His brain simply rejected the visual data. He grabbed his dropped bag and practically sprinted toward the perimeter, dragging his luggage through the thick red mud. He reached the heavy construction gate and grabbed the massive steel master lock securing the chain. He frantically, wildly shoved his house key into the bottom of the lock, twisting it with violent, desperate force. The key snapped cleanly in half, breaking off inside the steel mechanism. "Hey, back away from the perimeter right now." A deep, booming voice echoed across the dirt lot. A heavy-duty branded pickup truck was parked near the back of the property line. A site security guard stepped out, slamming his door shut. He wore a crisp, tactical uniform and kept his right hand resting casually but firmly on his utility belt. "This is an active demolition zone," the guard commanded, walking briskly toward the fence line. "You are currently trespassing on corporate property. I need you to step back to the public sidewalk immediately." Terence grabbed the chain-link fence, shaking it with both hands like a caged animal. "This is my house," he screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "I live here. This is my property. What happened to my house?" The security guard stopped a few feet away, looking at Terence with a mixture of pity and strict professional authority. He pointed a thick finger toward the center of the ruined lawn. "I do not know who you are, buddy," the guard stated flatly. "But nobody lives here. Look at the sign." Terence slowly turned his head, following the guard's pointing finger. Standing tall and unbothered in the middle of the destroyed front yard was a massive, glossy billboard. The black and silver lettering gleamed in the late afternoon sun. "Future site of Avalon Luxury Townhomes, property of Apex Developers, demolition in progress." Trent stumbled up behind Terence, his eyes wide and completely terrified. His brain finally caught up to the catastrophic reality of the situation. His free ride, his comfortable guest room, and his expensive golf clubs were completely and totally gone. Terence dropped his hands from the fence. He stumbled backward, his expensive shoes sinking deep into the mud. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He bypassed the text messages and hit the video call icon for my contact. I answered immediately. I was sitting on the plush sofa of the penthouse, the panoramic view of the untouched city skyline framing my face. I looked calm, perfectly rested, and completely in control. Terrence was a chaotic mess of sweat-red mud and absolute panic. The gutted ruins of the house loomed visibly over his shoulder on the video feed. "What did you do to my house?" Terrence screamed into the camera, his voice completely unhinged, tears of sheer terror finally breaking through his arrogant facade. "What did you do?" I looked directly into the camera lens of my phone, allowing the stark visual contrast of our environments to speak volumes before I even uttered a single word. Terrence was a masterpiece of absolute terror and physical discomfort. He was sweating profusely in the oppressive afternoon humidity, the red Georgia clay smeared across the hem of his expensive linen vacation shirt. Behind him, the jagged, unhinged remains of the front porch sat trapped behind a heavy chain-link construction fence. In sharp contrast, I was perfectly illuminated by the soft, natural light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my luxury penthouse. The climate control hummed at a crisp, refreshing 68 degrees. Soft jazz played seamlessly through the integrated smart home speakers. I adjusted my grip on Malik, ensuring his head was perfectly supported against my silk blouse, and offered my husband a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "You mean my limited liability company's house, Terrence?" I asked, my voice as smooth and cold as the marble countertops surrounding me. "The one you explicitly and aggressively signed away all your legal rights to because Trent convinced you it was a tax trap." Terrence visibly recoiled, his eyes darting frantically toward Trent, who was currently cowering behind a stack of designer luggage. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "That was a temporary market fluctuation," Terrence stammered, wiping a mixture of sweat and dirt from his forehead. "You cannot just sell a marital asset without my signature. I am calling the police. I am taking you to court. You are going to jail for this, Kendra." "You already signed the postnuptial agreement, Terrence," I reminded him, enunciating each word with crystal clarity. "You literally forced that pen into my hand 3 years ago to protect your pathetic annual corporate bonuses from my perceived business liabilities." Valerie filed the final execution of that exact agreement this morning. Apex developers wired $1.2 million in pure cash directly into my private corporate account. The transaction is completely bulletproof. You do not own a single piece of that dirt you are standing on. I watched his chest heave as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The absolute finality of the legal maneuver left him with zero leverage. "You locked me out." I continued, dropping the corporate tone and letting the raw, unfiltered reality of his betrayal strike him down. I was 3 days postpartum. I was actively bleeding from a major abdominal incision. I was holding your newborn son in the sweltering heat, and you allowed your fraternity brothers to lock me out of my own home. And while I was dealing with the police precinct, you were standing by a luxury pool in Cabo, lecturing me about being a team player. "I was building wealth for us," Terrence shouted, his voice cracking, as he pointed a trembling, muddy finger at Trent. "Trent said the crypto launch was a guaranteed return. I was trying to double the maternity fund so you would not have to stress about going back to work." "You stole $40,000 from your own infant son to fund a vacation for your mother," I corrected him, my tone dropping into a lethal register. "You handed my hard-earned savings to a man who still lives in a rented apartment that you secretly subsidize. So I liquidated the only massive liability left in my financial portfolio. You." Chloe shoved her way into the camera frame, practically knocking Terrence aside. Her oversized designer sunglasses were pushed up onto her head, and her face was twisted into a mask of pure panicked entitlement. "Where is all our stuff?" she demanded, her voice shrill and grating. "My limited edition bags were in the guest room. Trent's custom golf clubs were in the hall closet. Mom's antique heirlooms were stored upstairs. If you threw our belongings in a dumpster, we will sue you for destruction of property. I am far too intelligent to give you grounds for a civil lawsuit." "Chloe," I replied, taking a slow, measured sip of my sparkling water, I hired a premium white glove moving service to carefully pack every single item you claim to own. Terrence's Italian suits your designer bags, Trent's golf clubs, and every single piece of porcelain junk Brenda ever forced into my house. Terrence let out a massive sigh of relief, clearly operating under the delusion that he could simply drive to a facility and retrieve his expensive wardrobe. "Where are they?" he demanded, attempting to project a shred of his typical patriarchal authority. "Give me the address to the storage facility right now." I rented a unit under a fake name at a facility on the deepest industrial outskirts of the city. I informed him, thoroughly enjoying the way his momentary relief vanished into thin air. "It is a corrugated metal shed with zero climate control. I paid exactly $40 for 1 month of rent. The humidity is currently warping Trent's custom golf clubs, and the intense summer heat is melting the soles off your expensive loafers. Valerie will hand you the single silver key at our first divorce hearing. If you do not retrieve your belongings in 30 days, the facility will legally auction them off to the highest bidder." Brenda violently snatched the phone out of Terrence's hand. Her face filled the entire screen, her Southern Belle facade completely eradicated by a vicious, grasping fury. She was practically vibrating with rage, her perfectly manicured nails gripping the device like a weapon. "You listen to me, you disrespectful little brat!" Brenda screeched, her volume echoing so loudly I had to hold the phone further away from Malik's sleeping face. "You think you can humiliate my son and throw my family out on the street? Terrence is your legal husband. He is entitled to half of everything you own. I am hiring the most aggressive lawyer in Atlanta. We are going to sue you for half of that $1.2 million. We are going to take your business. We are going to take full custody of that baby, and we are going to leave you with absolutely nothing." I did not recoil. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterics. I simply looked through the camera lens and let out a low, genuine laugh. The sound was so cold, so completely devoid of fear, that it actually forced Brenda to stop screaming. "Sue me?" I asked, a dark, lethal amusement lacing my words. "You should be worrying about Trent." Brenda blinked, her furious expression faltering as confusion set in. Terrence tried to grab the phone back, but Brenda held it away from him, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about? Did Terrence actually tell you where he got the extra cash for your luxury penthouse suite upgrade?" I asked, watching Terrence's face drain of whatever color it had left. "Because it certainly did not come from my maternity fund. That specific $40,000 went straight into Trent's completely untraceable fake crypto wallet." I leaned forward, making sure my eyes locked directly onto the camera lens, ensuring they understood the absolute gravity of the trap they had walked into. "Terrence's corporate bonus does not officially hit until December," I stated, watching Trent actually physically step away from his brother-in-law, his hands raised in the air as if trying to distance himself from a live explosive. But somehow, Terrence managed to drop an extra $15,000 on your ocean views, premium steak dinners, and private yacht excursions. He did not win the lottery, Brenda. He accessed his firm's secure client portal. Terrence was shaking his head, his mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the inevitable metallic click beneath his feet. "I reviewed his private accounts while finalizing the divorce freeze," I explained, dropping the final devastating hammer. "Terrence has been actively embezzling client insurance premiums for the past 6 months to fund his desperate need to impress you and to secretly bankroll Trent's ridiculous lifestyle. And because I absolutely refuse to be legally tied to a massive financial crime, I took the liberty of downloading every single fraudulent transfer record." Brenda's face went entirely slack, the reality of federal prison finally overriding her greed. "Because I just sent the fraud department at Terrence's insurance firm the receipts showing exactly how he embezzled client premiums to fund your little getaway," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "They are going to audit his accounts by morning. You do not have a house. You do not have your belongings. And by this time tomorrow, your son will not have a career or a license to practice." I looked at the four of them standing in the red mud, surrounded by their useless designer luggage. their luxurious Mexican vacation officially turning into the permanent destruction of their lives. I pressed the red button and the line went dead. The sharp chime of the disconnected call echoed in the humid air, followed immediately by a heavy, suffocating silence. Terrence stood knee-deep in the ruined red clay of his former front lawn, staring at the darkened screen of his smartphone. The absolute finality of my words was still ringing in his ears, but his brain was desperately fighting to reject the reality of the situation. He had no house. He had no belongings. His corporate career was currently sitting in the crosshairs of a federal fraud audit, and the very foundation of his fragile, toxic ego had just been systematically dismantled by the woman he thought he could control. Terrence slowly lowered the phone. His chest heaved as he dragged oxygen into his lungs, the oppressive Georgia heat making it difficult to breathe. He turned his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto his brother-in-law. Trent was standing near the edge of the chain-link fence, looking like a cornered rat. His designer resort wear was stained with mud, and he was physically trembling, his eyes darting frantically toward the street as if calculating the quickest escape route. Terrence took one slow, deliberate step toward him. The thick mud sucked at his expensive loafers, completely ruining the leather, but Terrence did not notice. His mind had fixated on a single desperate lifeline. Liquidate it. Terrence commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rasp that sent a shiver down Chloe's spine. Trent swallowed hard, taking a small step backward. What Trent squeaked, his voice completely devoid of the arrogant crypto bro confidence he had been projecting for the entire 10-day vacation. Liquidate the coin right now! Terrence roared, the sudden volume making Brenda physically jump. You told me it was a guaranteed return. You told me the market cap was doubling this week. Pull out the initial $40,000 and pull out the profits. I need cash right this second. I have to hire an attorney. I have to get us into a luxury hotel. I have to fix this. Open your wallet application and initiate the transfer, Trent. Do it right now. Trent pressed his back flush against the steel mesh of the construction fence. All the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just shook his head, a microscopic, pathetic movement. What do you mean, no? Terrence demanded, closing the distance between them. Pull out the money. I cannot, Trent whispered, his voice cracking violently. Why not? Terrence screamed, stepping directly into Trent's personal space. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides. The veins in his neck were pulsing against his sweat-stained collar. Give me my money. Because there is no coin, Trent blurted out, folding under the pressure instantly. The words tumbled out of his mouth in a frantic, desperate rush. There was no crypto launch. There was no market cap. It was a lie. It was all a lie, Terrence. The silence that followed was absolute. Brenda stopped fanning herself. Chloe lowered her sunglasses, staring at her husband, as if he had just spoken a foreign language. Terrence stood perfectly still, his eyes wide, his brain refusing to process the magnitude of the confession. What are you talking about? Terrence asked, his voice suddenly dropping to a deadly whisper. I owed money. Trent sobbed, the tears mixing with the sweat and dirt on his face. I owed a lot of money to some very bad people operating out of an underground sports betting ring in Buckhead. They were going to break my legs, Terrence. They were going to hurt me. I needed a massive influx of cash to clear the books. I invented the coin launch so you would give me the $40,000. The money is gone. I handed it to a bookie the second you wired it to me. There are no profits. There is no investment. We have absolutely nothing. Terrence's mind snapped. The psychological break was instant and visceral. He had stolen $40,000 from his own infant son's future. He had committed federal embezzlement at his insurance firm to fund $15,000 worth of upgraded luxury for a man who had completely fabricated a financial empire. He had lost his wife, his $1 million suburban kingdom, and his career, all to impress a pathetic, gambling-addicted con artist. With a roar of pure, unfiltered, animalistic rage, Terrence lunged forward. He did not throw a punch. He simply launched his entire body weight directly at Trent's chest. The impact sent both men crashing violently onto the public sidewalk. Trent screamed as his spine hit the concrete, but Terrence did not care. He mounted his brother-in-law, his hands wrapping aggressively around the collar of Trent's designer shirt. They rolled into the thick red mud of the construction site, a chaotic, thrashing tangle of ruined luxury clothing and desperate violence. Trent thrashed wildly, throwing blind punches that connected with Terrence's jaw, but Terrence was fueled by the absolute destruction of his life. He slammed Trent back into the dirt, screaming incomprehensible threats. Chloe began shrieking hysterically, grabbing at Terrence's shoulders and trying to pull him off her husband. Terrence blindly shoved her backward, sending her stumbling into the pile of their oversized luggage. Two massive suitcases toppled over, popping open on impact and spilling brightly colored resort wear, expensive swimwear, and cheap duty-free souvenirs all over the wet, muddy pavement. Brenda was screaming at the top of her lungs, demanding that someone call the police entirely, forgetting that calling the authorities was the absolute worst possible maneuver for her son. Standing safely behind the chain-link fence, the Apex Developers site security guard watched the entire pathetic display unfold. He did not intervene. He simply reached for the radio clipped to his tactical belt, calmly contacted the local precinct, and reported a violent physical altercation and criminal trespassing in progress. Less than 7 minutes later, the wail of police sirens cut through the humid suburban air. 3 patrol cars swerved onto the cul-de-sac, their red and blue lights flashing brilliantly against the afternoon sun. Officers spilled out of the vehicles, shouting immediate commands to cease the violence. Terrence was forcibly pulled off a bloody, muddy Trent, his arms aggressively pinned behind his back. The reality of his situation crystallized as the cold, heavy steel of police handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists. He was read his rights, shoved unceremoniously into the back of a plastic-lined patrol cruiser, and driven away from the ruins of his former life. Terrence and Trent spent their first night back from Cabo San Lucas in a county holding cell. The contrast was staggering. 24 hours ago, they had been sipping imported tequila on a private balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Now they were sitting on hard, freezing concrete benches, separated by thick iron bars, surrounded by the smell of stale sweat and industrial bleach. They spent the entire night screaming at each other through the metal grating, endlessly shifting the blame, completely oblivious to the fact that their nightmare was only just beginning. The morning sun brought no relief, only the harsh, glaring reality of their consequences. Brenda had spent the entire night frantically pacing the lobby of a 24-hour bail bondsman operating out of a strip mall near the county jail. Her pristine credit rating, entirely dependent on Terrence's previously inflated income, was useless here. She was forced to sign over an exorbitant high-interest payday loan just to secure the funds necessary to post bail for both men. It was the ultimate humiliation for a woman who just yesterday had been demanding first-class airline upgrades. When Terrence finally walked out of the precinct doors, he looked like a broken man. His linen suit was stiff with dried mud and dried blood. He smelled strongly of the holding cell floor. He did not speak to his mother or his sister, who were waiting by a battered taxicab. His mind was racing desperately, formulating a plan to salvage the only thing he had left. He needed his office. He needed his computer, his secure network access, and the prestige of his corporate title. If he could just get to his desk, he could manipulate the internal routing numbers. He could hide the embezzlement tracks. He could fabricate a story about an unauthorized third-party hack. At the very least, he could lock himself in his office, sleep on the leather sofa, and figure out a legal strategy to fight my divorce filings. He instructed the taxi driver to bypass the hotel and head directly to the financial district. He needed to strike before the corporate fraud department initiated their standard morning protocols. The taxi pulled up to the gleaming glass facade of his insurance firm's corporate headquarters. Terrence stepped out aggressively, smoothing down his ruined, filthy clothing. He threw his shoulders back, attempting to project his usual aura of untouchable confidence, but he merely looked like a desperate vagrant wandering into a premium commercial space. He pushed through the revolving doors and marched purposefully toward the secure elevator banks. The morning rush was in full swing. Dozens of junior analysts, senior executives, and administrative staff were swiping their badges and entering the glass tubes. Several colleagues paused, their eyes widening in shock as they took in Terrence's bruised face and destroyed suit, but Terrence ignored them all. He pulled his corporate identification badge from his wallet, stepped up to the security turnstile, and firmly slapped the card against the magnetic reader. A sharp, harsh buzz echoed from the machine. The indicator light flashed a brilliant, unforgiving red. Terence frowned. He wiped the card against his pants and slapped it against the reader a second time. Buzz. Red light. Access denied. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He aggressively tapped the card against the reader a third, fourth, and fifth time, his panic escalating with every subsequent rejection. "That will not work anymore, Terence," a calm, authoritative voice stated from behind him. Terence spun around. Standing in the center of the pristine marble lobby were two grim-faced human resources directors holding thick manila folders. Flanking them were two serious-looking local detectives in plain clothes, their badges clearly visible on their belts. My digital delivery of his embezzlement records had been absolutely flawless. I had not just sent screenshots. I had compiled a meticulous, irrefutable portfolio of IP addresses, timestamp transfers, and hidden account routing numbers. The internal audit had not taken days. It had taken exactly 2 hours of the night shift cross-referencing my data to confirm that Terence had stolen client premiums. "Terence, your employment at this firm is terminated immediately effective as of midnight last night," the senior human resources director announced, her voice projecting clearly across the suddenly silent lobby. Dozens of colleagues had stopped in their tracks, actively watching the execution of a senior manager. "We have completed a preliminary review of the evidence provided regarding your unauthorized access to secure client funds." "It is a misunderstanding," Terence choked out, taking a step backward as the detectives moved forward. "My accounts were compromised. I am a victim of identity theft." "You can explain that to the fraud division," one of the detectives said, stepping into Terence's personal space and gesturing toward the exit. "The firm is officially pressing charges for corporate embezzlement. We need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding the missing $15,000. We will be executing a search warrant on your digital devices." Terence was not allowed to clear his desk. He was not allowed to gather his personal photos or his expensive fountain pens. He was flanked by the detectives and physically escorted out of the building. He walked the perimeter of the lobby, running a gauntlet of shocked, whispering colleagues. It was the ultimate crushing professional ruin for a man whose entire identity was built on projecting superiority. He was thrown out onto the sweltering downtown pavement, completely stripped of his title, his income, and his dignity. Later that afternoon, the reality of their destitute situation finally broke Brenda. They were sitting on the cracked, stained curb outside a cheap diner, utilizing the restaurant's free wireless internet to search for weekly motel rates. Terence was staring blankly at the concrete, the threat of federal prison hanging over his head. Trent was silently nursing his bruised jaw, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Brenda abruptly stood up. Her fists clenched, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She refused to accept defeat. She firmly believed that she was the matriarch of a powerful dynasty, and she was convinced that I was simply a rogue variable that needed to be aggressively forced back into line. "I am not living like this," Brenda snarled, kicking a discarded soda cup into the street. "I am not sleeping in a roach-infested motel, while that ungrateful girl sits in a luxury penthouse playing games with our lives. I am going to fix this right now. She thinks she can hide behind her security gates, but I am her family. I am going to march down to that corporate tower, demand access to my grandson, and put the fear of God into her." She turned on her heel and marched purposefully toward the nearest transit station, leaving the broken men sitting in the dirt. She was completely unaware that she was walking directly into a verbal slaughterhouse. 30 minutes later, Brenda stormed through the revolving doors of the Sovereign Tower. The lobby was a masterpiece of intimidating wealth. Towering walls of black marble, gleaming brass fixtures, and a massive circular reception desk, manned by 3 security concierges in tailored suits. Brenda marched directly up to the desk, slamming her palm flat against the polished stone. "I need access to the penthouse suite immediately," Brenda demanded, her voice deliberately loud, intending to intimidate the staff. "I am Kendra Wilson's mother-in-law. I am here to see my grandson, and I am not leaving this lobby until she comes down here and faces me. The head concierge, a tall man with a completely impassive expression, calmly tapped his keyboard. He picked up a sleek black telephone, dialed a secure line, and spoke quietly for a moment. He placed the receiver down and looked at Brenda. "Mrs. Wilson has been notified of your presence, ma'am," the concierge stated smoothly. "She is descending now. I must ask you to lower your voice." Brenda crossed her arms, a triumphant, vicious smirk spreading across her face. She thought she had won. She believed my willingness to come down meant I was intimidated by her public display. The gold elevator doors chimed softly and parted. I stepped out into the lobby, and the air around me seemed to instantly chill. I was immaculate. I wore a tailored emerald green silk dress that draped perfectly over my frame. My hair was flawlessly styled, and my makeup was sharp and pristine. I held Malik effortlessly in one arm, his tiny head resting peacefully against my shoulder. I did not look like a stressed, exhausted postpartum mother. I looked like the chief executive officer of a hostile takeover. Brenda immediately puffed up her chest, opening her mouth to launch her prepared tirade, but the words died in her throat the moment I locked eyes with her. There was no fear in my expression. There was no hesitation. There was only absolute, unfiltered disgust. I stopped 10 feet away from her, ensuring the security guards were within easy hearing distance. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic, aggressive energy. I spoke with a quiet, lethal precision that echoed clearly across the marble lobby. "You love to use the word family, Brenda," I began, my tone slicing through the air like a scalpel. "You scream it in lobbies and you use it as a weapon to demand respect you have entirely failed to earn. But you do not know the first thing about family." Brenda bristled, taking a step forward. "You listen to me." "No, you listen to me," I commanded, cutting her off with such sharp authority that she physically stopped moving. Family does not lock a bleeding, recovering mother and a 3-day-old infant out in the blistering heat to fund a luxury vacation with stolen money. Family does not watch their son embezzle client funds to pay for premium steak dinners while their grandchild's future is jeopardized. Family does not steal. You are not my family. You are a parasite who finally killed her host. I adjusted my grip on Malik, keeping my posture perfectly rigid. You demanded to live like royalty on my dime, and you encouraged your son to destroy his entire life to maintain your delusion. I continued, stripping away every ounce of her fabricated dignity. Your son is facing federal charges. Your son-in-law is a fraudulent, degenerate gambler. Your house is a pile of splintered wood, and you are standing in my lobby wearing dirty clothes demanding access to a child you abandoned for a margarita. Brenda's mouth opened and closed, her face flushing a deep, humiliating crimson. For the first time in her life, she had absolutely no response. The brutal, undeniable truth pinned her to the floor. I looked at the head concierge and gave a single dismissive nod. "Escort her off the property," I ordered cleanly. "If she steps foot in this building again, have her arrested for trespassing." I turned my back on her before the guards even moved. I walked calmly back to the private elevator, stepped inside, and let the gold doors slide shut, cutting off the sound of Brenda's outraged, desperate screaming as she was physically removed from the premises. That evening, the atmosphere inside the dingy, smoke-stained motel room off the interstate was suffocating. The peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent light bulb perfectly matched the bleak reality of their existence. Terrence sat on the edge of a sagging mattress, holding an ice pack to his bruised jaw. Brenda sat in the corner chair, staring blankly at the wall, completely shattered by her public humiliation. Chloe was crying silently, and Trent was nervously pacing the stained carpet. A sharp, sudden knock at the door made all four of them jump. Terrence stood up, his body tensing as he opened the door. A man in a plain polo shirt stood in the hallway holding a thick, legally sealed envelope. "Terrence Wilson?" the man asked. Terrence nodded slowly. The man shoved the envelope into Terrence's chest. "You have been served," the process server stated flatly before turning and walking away. Terrence carried the envelope back to the bed and ripped it open. He pulled out the stack of heavily expedited divorce documents. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the aggressive custody terms and the financial severance clauses. Then his eyes landed on a specific paragraph detailing the liquidated assets, specifically the $1.2 million payout from the sale of the suburban house. Terrence stopped reading. A slow, arrogant, completely toxic smirk spread across his bruised face. The dark, delusional confidence that had ruined his life suddenly flared back to life. He looked up at his miserable mother and sister, tapping the legal document with his finger. "She made a mistake," Terrence announced, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. "She completely screwed up. She sold the house while we were still legally married. It does not matter whose name was on the deed or what the LLC documents say. Under state marital property laws, any massive asset liquidated during the marriage is considered joint property." Trent stopped pacing, looking at Terrence with a glimmer of desperate hope. "What does that mean?" "It means," Terrence sneered, tossing the papers onto the cheap bedspread, "that we do not have to worry about my corporate charges right now. I am going to hire a shark of a lawyer, and I am going to counter-sue Kendra for exactly half of that $1.2 million. She thinks she left us with nothing, but she just handed me the key to a massive cash settlement. I am going to take $600,000 right out of her secure vault, and there is absolutely nothing she can do to stop me." 2 months later, the suffocating heat of July had given way to the crisp, unforgiving winds of late September. The Fulton County Family Court building smelled of industrial floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a sterile, unforgiving environment designed to strip away the emotional theatrics of failing marriages and reduce them to cold, hard legal facts. I sat at the polished wooden petitioner's table, feeling completely detached from the nervous energy vibrating through the room. I wore a tailored charcoal designer suit that fit like a second skin. My posture was perfect. My expression was an impenetrable fortress of calm. I had spent the last 8 weeks securing my empire, optimizing my business operations, and raising my son in absolute peace. I was not here to argue. I was here to watch an execution. Terrence arrived 12 minutes late. He burst through the heavy swinging doors of the courtroom, looking like a man who had spent the last 60 days living inside a nightmare. He wore a suit that was clearly off the rack, the fabric cheap, and the tailoring practically non-existent. The confident, arrogant swagger he used to project in his corporate life had completely evaporated. He was followed closely by a lawyer who looked entirely overwhelmed. The man carried a disorganized stack of manila folders and immediately began dropping papers onto the respondent's table. Terrence had clearly scoured the bottom of the legal barrel, finding the cheapest, most desperate attorney willing to take a case funded by high-interest credit cards. The presiding official, Judge Harrison, was a stern, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for aggressively dismantling unprepared litigants. She looked down at Terrence over the rim of her reading glasses, her expression radiating profound irritation at his tardiness. She banged her gavel, initiating the proceedings, and the floor was immediately handed over to Terrence's legal representation. The strategy they presented was utterly pathetic. Terrence took the stand and immediately attempted to play the role of the victimized, dedicated patriarch. He adjusted his cheap tie and looked directly at the judge, attempting to utilize his old sales tactics to manipulate the room. He painted a picture of a devoted husband who had simply gone on a brief family retreat only to return and find his life maliciously destroyed. "She is a hormonal, bitter woman, Your Honor," Terrence testified, his voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "She suffered from severe postpartum depression, and she completely lost her mind. We built that life together. I worked tirelessly to provide a beautiful suburban home for our growing family. She sold our family home out of pure spite while I was out of the country. She liquidated a marital asset without my consent. I am legally entitled to half of the proceeds from that sale. I am demanding $600,000 immediately to rebuild my life and recover from this malicious financial abuse." I did not flinch. I did not roll my eyes or scoff at the breathtaking audacity of his lies. I simply sat with my hands folded neatly on the table and let him dig his own grave. Terrence genuinely believed that his masculine authority and his ability to spin a narrative would save him. He was completely oblivious to the fact that family court did not operate on emotional manipulation, it operated on a brutal paper trail. Judge Harrison turned her gaze toward my side of the room. She looked at Valerie, who was sitting beside me with the relaxed, predatory posture of a lioness watching a wounded gazelle. Valerie stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. She did not carry a disorganized stack of papers. She carried a single, sleek leather portfolio. Your Honor, my opposing counsel seems to be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of corporate law, property rights, and basic reality. Valerie began, her voice echoing through the quiet courtroom with chilling precision. My client did not sell a marital home out of spite. My client, acting as the sole managing director of an independent limited liability company, liquidated a corporate asset to protect her financial solvency from a man who was actively embezzling funds. Valerie stepped up to the podium and opened her portfolio. She extracted a crisp, stapled document and handed a copy to the bailiff to present to the judge. I would like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A, Valerie stated cleanly. This is a post-nuptial agreement drafted 3 years ago. You will note the signature on the final page belonging to Terrence Wilson. In this document, Mr. Wilson explicitly, legally, and aggressively signed away any and all rights, claims, or interests in the limited liability company managed by my client. He demanded this document to protect his own corporate bonuses from my client's business ventures. He formally, legally separated himself from the very asset he is now demanding half the value of. The property was never a marital asset, Your Honor. It was a corporate holding. Mr. Wilson has absolutely zero legal claim to a single penny of that $1.2 million. Terrence shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the color draining from his face as he realized his entire legal strategy had just been incinerated in less than 60 seconds. His cheap lawyer frantically flipped through his own papers, looking completely panicked. But Valerie was not finished. She pulled a second document from her portfolio. Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Wilson has painted a picture of a devoted father taking a brief family retreat. I would like to submit Exhibit B into evidence. This is a certified transcript of text messages sent by Mr. Wilson's mother, Brenda Wilson, and corroborated by Mr. Wilson himself. These texts explicitly prove that Mr. Wilson and his family intentionally locked my client out of her own home. They locked a bleeding, recovering mother and a 3-day-old infant out in the sweltering July heat. Why did they do this? Because my client refused to fund a luxury vacation to Cabo San Lucas. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Harrison read the transcript of the text messages, her jaw tightening with every line she processed. She read the demands for pot roast, the complaints about crying babies, and the sheer vicious entitlement radiating from the pages. Mr. Wilson then proceeded to illegally access a joint savings account, emptying $40,000 of my client's hard-earned maternity fund to pay off his brother-in-law's underground gambling debts. Valerie continued delivering the final killing blow. He abandoned his newborn son, locked his recovering wife out of her shelter, and stole her financial safety net to fund a criminal enterprise. My client did not act out of hormonal bitterness, Your Honor. My client acted with brilliant, necessary survival instincts. She liquidated her corporate asset to ensure her son would not be dragged into the financial ruin Mr. Wilson was actively creating. Terrence gripped the edges of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. He opened his mouth to object, to shout over Valerie to spin another lie. But the judge raised her hand, demanding absolute silence. Judge Harrison looked down at Terrence with an expression of absolute, unadulterated contempt. The air in the room felt heavy, heavy, with the impending weight of judicial retribution. Mr. Wilson, you have presented this court with a fabricated narrative built entirely on audacity and delusion. The judge began, her voice cold and completely unforgiving. You sat in my courtroom and attempted to use postpartum recovery as a weapon to excuse your own staggering financial and emotional abuse. You abandoned a newborn infant. You actively participated in locking a recovering mother out of her home. You stole $40,000 from a joint account meant for the care of your child. And you have the sheer unmitigated gall to demand $600,000 from a corporate entity you specifically contracted yourself away from. Terrence swallowed hard, shrinking back into his chair. The limited liability structure is completely upheld, the judge declared, slamming the gavel down with a sharp crack. You have absolutely zero legal claim to the proceeds of that property sale. You will not receive a single cent of that $1.2 million. Terrence's cheap lawyer dropped his pen, defeated. But the judge was only just warming up. Furthermore, the judge continued, her eyes locking onto Terrence like a hawk. Because you maliciously and intentionally emptied a joint account to fund a vacation and cover illicit debts, I am ordering you to repay the entire $40,000 to your ex-wife immediately. Because your actions forced this unnecessary litigation, you will cover 100% of Ms. Wilson's premium legal fees. Terrence let out a choked, desperate gasp. Your Honor, I do not have a job. I was terminated. I cannot afford to pay that. That is not the concern of this court, Mr. Wilson. Judge Harrison replied without a single ounce of pity. You destroyed your own lucrative corporate career by engaging in documented embezzlement. This court will not penalize your infant son for your criminal behavior. I am imputing your child support obligations based on your previous executive salary. You will pay maximum monthly child support. I will authorize immediate garnishment of your wages from whatever minimum wage employment you manage to secure now that your professional reputation is entirely dead. The realization of total, inescapable ruin washed over Terrence in a massive, suffocating wave. His chest tightened painfully as the walls of the courtroom seemed to close in around him. There was no secret bank account waiting for him. There was no luxury home to return to. There was no corporate ladder left to climb. He had walked into this courtroom expecting to intimidate me into a massive cash settlement. Instead, he was walking out with insurmountable debt, a ruined reputation, and a legally mandated financial obligation that would keep him trapped in poverty for the next 18 years. There was no escape. The contrast between my reality and the nightmare Terrence had built for himself was absolute. While I walked out of that courtroom and stepped into the back of a waiting private town car, Terrence was forced to take a public bus back to the miserable reality he had created. He was currently living in a cramped, decaying two-bedroom apartment in the absolute worst section of the city. The drywall was peeling, the plumbing leaked constantly, and the entire complex smelled strongly of stale cooking oil and roach repellent. He was trapped in a tiny, humid living space with Brenda and Chloe. Brenda spent her days sitting on a stained thrift store sofa, endlessly complaining about the lack of central air conditioning and mourning the loss of her wealthy suburban lifestyle. Chloe paced the cramped kitchen, sobbing hysterically and screaming at her brother for ruining her life. Trent, unsurprisingly, had completely vanished. The moment the criminal investigations began circling and the money entirely dried up, the fake crypto investor had packed a duffel bag in the middle of the night. He stole Chloe's remaining diamond earrings, pawned them for bus fare, and fled the state to escape the underground bookies who were actively hunting him. He left his wife heartbroken, destitute, and entirely dependent on a brother who could barely afford to buy generic groceries. They were trapped in a sweltering hell of their own making, constantly, viciously blaming each other for a collapse they had all actively participated in. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my corporate penthouse, looking out over the glittering, sprawling expanse of the Atlanta skyline. The sun was setting, casting a brilliant wash of gold and violet across the glass towers of the financial district. The climate control hummed perfectly, maintaining a crisp, refreshing atmosphere. Malik was sitting on his thick plush playmat in the center of the pristine living room, giggling happily as he swatted at a brightly colored toy. He was safe. He was secure. He would never know the toxic, manipulating environment of the people who shared his DNA. My business was actively thriving. Unburdened by Terrence's constant demands for luxury status symbols and Brenda's endless requirements for financial subsidies, my corporate portfolio was expanding rapidly. The $1.2 million was heavily diversified, generating passive income that secured my son's future before he could even walk. My peace was absolute and impenetrable. I took a slow sip of my evening tea, feeling the warm, soothing liquid calm my throat. I looked down at the city lights flickering to life below me. Terrence, Brenda, and Chloe had looked at me and seen a stepping stone. They saw a quiet, accommodating woman they could walk all over to reach their delusions of grandeur. They thought they could extract my wealth, utilize my labor, and discard my humanity whenever it suited their arrogant desires. What they failed to realize was that I was never just a stepping stone. I was the entire concrete foundation holding their fragile, pathetic lives together. And the absolute second I decided to remove myself, their whole fabricated world collapsed into dust, leaving them buried under the rubble of their own toxic entitlement. The most powerful lesson to learn here is that your true security stems entirely from financial and emotional independence. You must never allow yourself to become a stepping stone for toxic people, even if they happen to share your last name or wear a wedding ring. Blood does not excuse abuse, and walking away from manipulation is not a failure. It is the ultimate victory. When you stop shrinking to fit their broken narrative, you finally create space to build an authentic life. Please take a moment right now to share your own personal survival story down in the comments.